Welcome to day 2 of the PSPRS Annual Employer Local Board Conference. Our first speaker up today is Call Team Manager Larry Lopez. Larry's going to be covering payroll reporting and demographics. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Lopez, and welcome to the 2021 Annual Conference. Today, I'm going to be reviewing payroll reporting and demographic updates. These are some processes that kind of go hand in hand, and we're going to talk about some ways to avoid any errors and make this process go as smoothly as possible. So jumping right in, there are a couple of different means to making demographic updates. And one of them is a manual process that takes place on the demographics manual page of the employer portal. And we do look at this as the easiest way to provide true and accurate data with regard to the members' actual statuses and the effective dates. And we want to keep in mind that members who are placed in a non-contributory status during a pay period, after the beginning of the pay period, they will be expected to make contributions. So there are a couple of other steps that you might need to enter for members who change statuses in the middle of a pay period. Then there are other status changes that can take place in the contribution reporting process. And those are performed with the use of non-payment reason codes through the validation process. And we'll look at both of those steps and which one is a preferred method and how to go about making sure your statuses are accurate before you perform your contribution upload. So jumping right in, the demographics update page is it's a manually populated page, and it should be used anytime that there are changes needed for a member's demographics or for a member's status. And the reason we prefer this is that it provides a true and accurate effective date, and there are more status types that are available for you on the demographics manual page. We want to keep in mind that inaccurate member statuses can lead to contribution errors or reporting errors, validation errors on the contribution reporting process. So we want to take these steps with the demographics manual page first. Of course, we do want to bear in mind that non-payment reason codes are very important. They kind of work with the flow of the contribution reporting process. And it's just a really helpful tool, but when used in the proper method. We'll talk about some of those non-payment reason codes and how they affect member statuses in a few moments. Moving on, looking at the demographics update page, overall, we do consider it the preferred method to making changes to member statuses and member demographics. You will find, I'm going to kind of harp on that as we go along. You'll hear me repeat that over and over again today because it really is important. And again, even though the use of non-payment reason codes is a really important tool, we do want to stay away from the temptation to use them as a means of getting past some of the stop gaps or the error messages that we see. Many times these are valid error messages, and we want to make sure that we address them properly. And so again, the demographics update page should be the primary method that you use for updating member statuses and effective dates. Now, some of the ramifications of using the contribution process are that local board and employee estimates will be affected. Primarily, you'll see problems with drop entry for a member, but overall, anytime there's data that's inaccurate or incomplete in our system, it is going to lead to problems with validation and with members and local boards performing estimates. Then again, system accuracy, just for the sake of accuracy. The demographic manual page will allow you to provide true and accurate data, true and accurate effective dates and statuses. And again, that's the primary reason why we prefer the use of the demographics manual page for demographic and status changes. Moving on, how do we actually get to this page? You'll notice this is my account and I have some administrative rights that you may not recognize, but overall, we all have the employers drop-down menu. And under employers, you'll see the demographics and a sidebar menu opens for the demographics manual page. Once you select this, it'll bring you to another page, and this is just an example. I use myself as the example. There are required fields, and they're indicated by asterisks, red asterisks on those fields. And these are fields that must be populated each time you make any type of entry through this page. Ultimately speaking, when you hire a member, it also requires an email address. And although it's not indicated as a required field, if you try to make a hire or hire somebody without an email address, the system will catch it and advise you need to provide an email address. So once you've completed the population of those required fields, you can then select an effective date and a status that you're trying to enter for the member. And when you click submit, the system will either provide you with a successful message, letting you know that the changes you've submitted are successful, or it will provide you with a failed message. And we are currently working on improvements to the failed messages. You may have noticed some of them over the past several months. We're trying to make them more descriptive so that it doesn't just tell you that it's failed, but it tells you why and what type of change you need to make in order to enter the data that you're trying to enter. With that being said, you can do more than just make status changes. You can also perform demographic changes. And demographic changes can be performed by simply populating the required fields. And then rather than providing an effective date and a status, because you're not changing the member's status, you may be changing the member's last name due to a divorce or a marriage. You may be changing their address or phone number. You can make those changes by populating the required fields, and then you can simply submit that information. Our system will overwrite the existing information for the member, and no status change will take effect. And of course, you can always advise a member to complete a Form 9 address and name change form. They can send those directly to us, and we can process the change for them as well. But this gives the employer an opportunity to make those changes when they receive them from the member as well. Once we've completed any status changes, any demographic updates, then your file or your employment record is prepared for any contributions. And that's a good flow. Anytime that you enter and you're going to be making contribution reporting, you'll want to make any demographic changes prior to that. And that way, when you do perform your upload, we'll be expecting what you're providing. We won't be expecting anything that you're not. Again, how do we approach that? We're going to go back to the portal, and under the employers drop-down menu, we'll simply select contributions. That'll take us to the contribution reporting page. And one thing that I want to mention is that there are a lot of different fields and a lot of different pages to the contribution reporting, and it can be a little intimidating, but it's not a complicated system. It is very specific. And once you get more familiar with it, it becomes much, much easier to navigate. And so the biggest thing that I can suggest is not to be intimidated by the complexity of the system. It really isn't that complex. But again, once you've selected contributions from the drop-down menu, it's going to take you to select a work group, and you'll only have access to the individual work groups that are assigned to you or to your employer. If you find that you're not seeing the work group that you need to submit, you can always contact our active members group, and we can make sure that you have proper access. Now, you'll select your employment group and click the View Employer link. That'll take you to the file type and pay period selection page. And one thing you want to keep in mind is that the submission method is the type of file you're going to upload, and you can save that. I've noticed in the past that some employers select that each and every time. And so you can actually select the file type that you're going to be using on an ongoing basis, and you can select to save those settings so that the next time you come in, all you have to do is select the pay period, and you can continue to submission. Selecting the green button after selecting a pay period will bring you to the contribution upload page, and you can either drag and drop. You'll see a field provided. You can see it under the window there. You'll see a field provided that you'll populate with your file. You can either browse for it, or you can drag and drop it into that field. You can see I browsed for this file. That's what it'll look like once you've successfully selected your file. And you have the option of removing it You can browse for a different file, or in this case, we're gonna click the next upload file. And the one thing to remember about this is whenever you click that next upload file button, you will provide us with a copy of that file you're uploading. So throughout the process, if you run into errors, our active members team can pull that file and we can walk through those steps and see the errors that you're seeing along with you. And that way, if there's confusion, you'll be able to walk through it with us and we'll see exactly what you're seeing. So you'll select next upload file, and that's going to bring you to the validation page. And obviously, we cleared some of the data here for privacy, but generally speaking, all of these fields will be populated. And you notice on the left, the members are populated based on the information that's provided from your upload. And our site will provide a view of roughly 50 to 75 members on this page. So if you have more contribution line items in your file, then you may not see all of them, but they are all there. And of course, you'll select the validate button so that our system will run your contribution upload against what we're expecting. And of course, in this case, as an example, we note that there are contributions required that were not in the upload. And this was done purposely to illustrate the contribution not found in is required field. This is an error message. It's a red error message. We denote error messages by color, and red error messages are stop messages. You must complete a change either to a member's status, a member's effective date, make changes to your file. Some change has to be made in order to proceed from here. You will not be able to continue from here. The idea is that all of your contributions are accurate before any of your contributions are accepted. And so we'll go over some more detail for the contribution not found and is required of the red error messages. There are two primary contribution or validation errors that employers will run into. One, of course, is the contribution not found. And this refers to a missing contribution or contribution type. It's not necessarily that we're expecting a contribution for a member and he's not there. We may be expecting a specific type of contribution and that type of contribution is not there. So it can be specific to a missing type, missing member. It can also, basically, it can also be generated by an incomplete or inaccurate contributory status effective date. And so you may have the member in a non-contributory status after the beginning of the pay period. Well, we're expecting contributions for the portion of the pay period that the member was working. So we want to keep that in mind. And that's, again, why we were looking for accuracy on the demographics manual page. Those effective dates are really important. They become really important in the contribution upload process. Next are unexpected contributions. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the contribution not found. We may be receiving a contribution from you that we're not expecting. And it may not be that we don't want the contribution, we just want a different type of contribution. And so, like I said, it goes hand in hand with the contribution not found. We may need to make changes to member statuses. We may need to make changes to member status effective dates. But these are the types of error messages that need a fix before you can proceed. We have another type of error message, and that's displayed here in blue. We use the blue messages to denote an error that has been corrected. And frankly, the only thing that's required at this point is your approval. So when you run a file, in this case, the member came up as a contribution not found and is required. I simply populated the member's pay date and his pensionable wages and hit validation again. Our system calculated the rate for you, and it gives you this message to advise you that a change has been made. Do you approve of this? And if you do approve, you can proceed to the preview invoice page. But one key point here is to use the download to CSV file, because as I stated, you need to acknowledge these error messages and you need to accept or agree with the correction. Downloading CSV file is a way to record that correction and record that acceptance of that correction. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but just to review the error messages, again, red error messages are stoppages. You cannot continue unless a change is made to the upload file, to the member status, maybe the member status effective date. And then, of course, our system is not infallible. So it may require contact with our active members team so that changes can be made internally to the member's account. It may be something as simple as a social security number or birth date. But again, we can make changes that will allow your file to be accepted as well. Reviewing the blue error messages again, strictly speaking, these are corrections that have been identified by our system. We've made those corrections and we're simply asking you to acknowledge them and accept them. There is the incidental legacy contribution error message, and it's more of an artifact. It's generated based on a member's contribution error that we corrected. So it does state, please review, that this is an error message that you want to review and acknowledge. And then again, you can record it by downloading the CSV file. And that actually takes us to the CSV file itself. And this looks a little complicated, but it's not. As I mentioned earlier, the top member on the list here, Richard, he came up as a contribution not found and is required. And I simply populated the member's pay date and populated his pensionable salary. And you can tell by looking at this that this employer's alternate contribution rate is 43.48%. Based on a $1,000 pensionable salary, it comes to $434.80. Again, the reason I mention this is that this was something that wasn't in your file when you uploaded, and you may not have been prepared to pay that. But now it's going to appear on your invoice, and you have a record of why you're paying that or why your invoice is more than you were expecting to pay. In this case, when you download the CSV file, you're not only recording that information, but you're saving it for future date in case you have an audit. You never know how long you're going to need these documents. So this is an itemization of each and every contribution based on the member. So it's just a really detailed itemization of what your invoice is going to be. Always a great idea to save these for future use, like I said, for audits and things like that we may not necessarily be prepared for. Again, after downloading the CSV file and saving that, you can proceed by selecting the preview invoice page. And one thing to keep a note of is that you've not reached any point of no return. At no point so far through the validation process have you reached a point where you can't stop, make corrections, and then try again. There is a little bit of apprehension about clicking the preview invoice page. This is a less detailed itemization that's provided on the preview invoice page. And the idea is that we're going to give you a look at it so that you can compare notes. And again, if you approve, then of course you can accept that. So clicking the preview invoice page is going to take you to the preview invoice. This displays 3 or 4 key indicators that you should take note of. Again, this is a preview only. And if you note any discrepancy between the information that's displayed and your information that you've uploaded, you have the opportunity to stop, maybe contact our office, review your records, and determine where the discrepancy is and whether or not you want to accept this. Point number 2 is the credit account options. Many of you may recall drop rollback credits or Hall Parker credits, or in this case, this is a miscellaneous credit. You may also see prepay credits here. It is important to note that these credits can only be used toward the contributions that come to public safety. If you have DC members and you have contributions going over to the nationwide system, they will not appear on your invoice. This is your last opportunity to view these. And many employers will print this page and keep it as a record of what those contributions were. But that kind of takes us to number 3. Nationwide contributions are displayed at the bottom of the page. Again, credits cannot be used for these, but it is a good tool that will allow you to kind of summarize what you're going to be expecting to send to nationwide. And at this point, once you do click, I accept, that's where you've reached a point of no return. And just as it says, you're accepting the information that you see, the invoicing that you see, and you will be provided with an invoice that matches. It's really important to note that if you view anything on this page that does not meet with your approval, you can stop. You can simply go to the top of the page and go to the home page, contact whoever you need to contact to make any corrections, and then run the process again. So again, the point of no return is clicking I accept. And until you reach that point, or until you click that button, you can make any edits or changes that you need. That's pretty much the breadth of the program here. I just wanted to touch on a few points. Remember, don't let the system intimidate you. It is specific. It is not complex. We just ran through that whole process there pretty quickly. You definitely want to use the demographics manual page as the default for member status updates, member demographic updates, things like that. Validation errors again, red error messages, they require a change. Something has to change in order to get past a red error message. You'll more than likely always have to start over. But as you saw in the example, you can simply make edits on that page and then revalidate. And if that meets with your approval, you'll be able to proceed. Blue messages, again, show those corrections, and they simply require that you accept them or that you agree with those corrections before you proceed. Next, always download the CSV file. It is a detailed itemization of your invoice. When you get your invoice, it'll be itemized by contribution type. It will not be itemized for each and every individual member. And that's going to be really helpful down the road if you have an audit or something like that. Remember that the process is not complete. You've not reached a point of no return until you click the I accept button. And then, of course, if changes need to be made, you can contact us and we can work with our development team, our technical support group, to try to make changes for you. But if you see anything that you do not agree with, please do not click I accept. Those are kind of the major points that we wanted to go over with you today. If we have any questions from the field, we're happy to answer.
Larry, we are opening it up for questions right now. I have half a question asking if you can discuss the proper steps for demographic entry and code uploading.
Of course. So demographic entry, again, starts with on the portal under the employers page, on employer drop-down menu. You'll drop down, hover over demographics, and then select demographics manual. Again, this takes you to the page where you select the employer and the work group. You'll populate the required fields and then enter an effective date and a particular status that you're selecting for that member. Generally speaking, it's that simple. It is a manual process, and employers that have a larger staff may find that it takes more time than using the contribution or non-payment reason codes. But the more you use the demographics manual page, the more familiar you'll be with it, and you'll find that the easier it is to get through it. And then anytime you do run into any type of discrepancy, it's easier to resolve. And beyond that, it takes the guesswork out of the contribution reporting process. So it does take a little more time up front, but it saves you time on the end when you're performing contribution uploads and validations, because you know that the statuses that your members are all in are accurate. I hope that answered the question.
I think the rest of this question came in, and I was other questions online. If you could just discuss again, I hate to be repetitive, proper steps for demographic entry and upload codes for military leave.
Oh, okay, great. So that's actually a really good question. It comes up quite often. With regard to military service, members can be placed in a non-contributory status, and we have several of them. There's simply leave without pay. There's also presidential leave and non-presidential leave. The fact of the matter is that statute states that upon return from military leave, some decisions will be made as far as what type of contributions will be made up for the member. So on the front end, simply placing the member in a leave without pay status is all that's required, because while they're gone, you're not going to be making contributions. It's not till they return that those contributions may be made up. And then depending on the nature of their leave, it'll determine when and how and who makes those contributions. Now, with regard to changing employers, that's the one that kind of comes up more often, where an employee may leave a certain employer. And if that employer does not update with a quit or terminated status, then the new employer was going to have trouble hiring that member because they're already working for another employer in the system. So it is really vitally important that as quickly as possible, when a member leaves employment, that an employer goes into the demographics update page and selects the proper termination code or status for that member, and again, selects the proper effective date. It's very rare that a member will start working for another employer before their termination date with their current employer. And so primarily speaking, if that old employer or the employer that the member's leaving gets into the system, updates the termination, then the new employer is not going to have trouble. And that's a key indicator too. If you're the new employer and you see that you're trying to hire a member and it's not accepting it, it's likely the prior employer has not terminated them yet, and so they're not eligible to be hired again. You can contact our office. We can reach out to the prior employer and make sure that they update the correct status. We can help you get through those tight squeezes. But that's where the effective dates really come into play. A member may leave, and if you use a non-payment reason code to update their effective date, it may give them the full cycle, where in the middle of that cycle, they've started working for someone else. I hope that makes sense.
Larry, we have another question here.
Sure.
What are some of the most common error reasons that you come across?
Pretty much the contribution not found is required. And again, that can refer to a contribution altogether. A member is required to make a contribution, or you're simply providing an inaccurate contribution type. The contribution type is not accepted. It will generate an unexpected contribution. If the contribution type is accurate, but the member's not appearing on the upload, then of course will generate the contribution not found. So there's two reasons that contribution not found can be generated. It's either missing contribution altogether, or the incorrect contribution is being provided, and vice versa with the unexpected contribution. Those are the two primary ones that we run into.
Larry, we have another question on the line.
Okay.
Is there any way to know if an employee has retired from a PSPRS employer before? There
is. There are two ways, actually. Number one, we do have a member lookup, an employee lookup, and although the member's contribution status with their prior employer is key to accuracy with your results from that, there is, again, the employee lookup, where any employer can perform a lookup and see the status of a member. And in each case, it's going to give an effective date, and it's going to give a status for that member. So if you're hiring somebody who's already retired, when you perform an employee lookup for them, you will see that they've left employment. And when you go to hire them on the demographics page, if you try to hire a member who's retired, it will generate an error message that says this member's not eligible for that status. You must select hired return to work. And that goes more in line with the statute, where the term hired return to work or return to work is, it's not a member who's been away and is coming back to work. It's a member who's retired and is filling a position that is a covered position. Those are the two indicators that you'll see, both the employee lookup, and when you try to hire somebody, it'll actually correct you.
And we are opening up the lines to additional questions for Larry Lopez. We have 10 more minutes of this presentation. Larry, please bear with us.
Of course. I can go over some brief finer points of the system. As I mentioned earlier, the demographics manual page is the page that allows you to provide an effective date for the member's status. And again, as I mentioned earlier, with a member who changes employment or who leaves employment, if that member leaves in the middle of a pay cycle, we're still going to require a contribution for that pay cycle. And the suggestion would be to simply place that member in a leave without pay status from the beginning of the cycle, if they didn't work, and then terminate them in the middle of the cycle. So you would enter two manual entries for that member, one to indicate we're not going to be expecting a contribution for that pay period, and the other to indicate that the member has actually left employment. Like I said, it is a manual entry page, and for employers who have a larger staff, it can be time consuming, but the key to that is that, again, that time consuming on the front end will help save time in the contribution reporting process, and it avoids any kind of the error messages that we just went through.
Larry, are there any occasions where the employee lookup process and the information available is not completely accurate? And are there occasional errors in the system? And if so, what should employers do and how do they handle that?
That's a very good question. This goes back to the temptation to use the non-payment reason codes as a way to get around some of the error messages. In many cases, the prior system that we used didn't validate the contributions as they came in. And so what that leads to is inaccurate data in the system. Because those validations only started with 2017, the creation of the Tier 3 membership, it's only since 2017 that all of these finer points for each individual member have been validated. And so when you do perform a lookup, if the member hasn't had an employment change since 2017, you may run into inaccurate data being provided by our employee lookup. That's generally speaking the cause that we found. The biggest cause that we found is that these are new validations. Members' information simply wasn't validated prior to July of 2017, and therefore we're turning up inaccurate responses to the employee lookup. The simplest, the only way that you can resolve that is by simply contacting the active members group. We will go through our records and determine exactly what the nature of the problem is. We can fix the member statuses that will then allow you to make the changes that you're trying to make for the member.
Larry, is PSPRS working towards a paperless system? PSPRS put out several communications about a coming pension administration system. To begin with, we are trying to move to a paperless system. It's cumbersome. It's cumbersome for you. It's cumbersome for us. And so we are making arrangements and planning on moving to a paperless system. The current system that we are using with regard to member data and storage is not our end-all be-all. The system and the board has already approved the creation of a new database for housing member records, for processing validation. All of that goes hand in hand with going paperless. And well, frankly, being a member of the call center team and our active members group, I have limited access to dates or more solidified plans, but it is in the works. We are working towards a paperless environment with a database that is much easier to use and much more automated. So yeah, definitely. Excellent, thank you, Larry. And we're keeping these questions open as we have just a few more minutes.
One thing I did want to touch on is that right now, all of our active members are housed in our newest database. Our retired members are not, and so there is a disconnect between the two systems, but there's a disconnect between an active member and a retired member. So the distinction is not a bad thing. Again, moving forward, we are in the process of working with some software developers to try to develop a system that's going to contain everything all in one database And that way, it may make it easier. Frankly, it'll make it a lot easier for us as an administrator, but it will help with things like we mentioned earlier with the return to work statuses and things like that, returning proper and accurate employee lookups. It'll all kind of come together and patch some of those holes as well. Is that all for questions, or have any more?
Larry, that appears to be all of the questions. We have about 1 minute left. If anyone has a question out there, now's the time to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I didn't run through that too fast. Like I said, it's not a real complex process. It's just specific. And if we lay the groundwork and make the status updates and effective dates accurately, then that's going to save time and confusion and complexity in the upload process, which of course is the every 2 weeks, everybody reports their contributions. So again, spending a little bit of time on the front end really can help to avoid delays and confusion on the back end.
Thank you, Larry. And we'll be taking a short break. We will resume our programming at 9:45. Employer Relationship Manager Phil Coleman will be giving his presentation on Tier 3 enrollment and benefits. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in today's conference. I'd like to open up by thanking the committee, my coworkers who have been assisting in this awesome state-of-the-art program. In lieu of being at a convention center, we're streaming this, and took us a little bit to figure some of this out. So I'd like to thank Joann Lowey, the local board manager, who's assisted, Vivian Padilla, who's also on the committee with me in setting this up. We've got our crack IT team, Chris, Drew, and Billy, that have done a lot of extra work for us to take care of business. We've got Christian, our communication director, who's assisting in many different ways. And Robert Ortega is helping us out today as well. So again, a team effort, a lot of good people here trying to make things happen. And we hope that you enjoy the balance of today and going in tomorrow as well. There we go. My bad. After all those compliments, I'm doing something wrong myself. So pension reform. Across the country, we've seen pension reform, even here in Arizona, whether it's with the public safety plan, the correctional officer retirement plan, or the elected official plan. We've seen changes. We've gone from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to Tier 3 for all those new hires across our programs. Some factual information to share with you at this point in time. We've seen an increase in Tier 3 public safety members in a year's period of time to the tune of about 1,000 additional members. So last year, June 30, we had about 1,900 members. And right now in Tier 3, we're close to 3,000. Tier 3 is about 99% funded, which is outstanding. Got a lot of contributions coming in, not much money going out, so that helps us out. We've got about 208 employers in the risk pool that are currently over 100% funded. Now let's remember, brand new plan, contributions coming in. We're obviously not paying retirements, maybe a couple disabilities right now. So our exposure is minimal. But again, I think we're on the right trajectory. The Board of Trustees is keeping their eye on the ball when it comes to Tier 3 and making sure that our funding ratios remain where they need to be. Currently, we've got about 199 employers that have hired a Tier 3 member. So there are some employers out there that have yet to hire that brand new member that would participate in the Tier 3 public safety program. The employer is going to hire this new police officer or firefighter. Again, remembering new hires as of July 1 of 2017 go into that Tier 3 category. The local board is going to determine, when does the clock start ticking for this Tier 3 member? The way the statute's written, the local board determines that the data hire or graduation from the academy is when, again, that 90-day clock starts for the member. Full-time public safety, 40 hours a week, engaged in hazardous duty, has to be AZ post-certified police officer or a firefighter to be a participant in the Tier 3 public safety plan. So one of the good aspects of this program is that pre-employment physical. The local board is going to designate a physician to conduct a pre-employment physical for that new applicant, ultimately looking for that, previous knee injury or shoulder injury that they may have sustained, prior to becoming a police officer or firefighter. In the event that that independent medical evaluator finds that there is a pre-existing condition, the local board would then send a certified letter to the member indicating that they're aware of that previous pre-existing injury. Remember that pre-employment physical or medical evaluation is paid for by the employer. As Larry talked about earlier, the demographics, the employer, HR, payroll, whomever it might be designated within that, with that employer group, is going to do a demographic check on the employee. Are they employed in a different capacity? Are they a Tier 2 member? Very crucial to your success to determine, is this a brand new person to public safety, or do they have a past record in the plan? So the employer goes through the portal and does that investigation work. This is huge to make sure that we don't have to, or you, the employer, don't have to do any retroactive adjustments. You thought the individual is a Tier 3 member and ultimately they're a Tier 2. And then we've got some catching up to do here. Employee lookup, it's pretty simple, pretty intuitive. The employer is going to select, the employer, city of, town of, whomever it might be, member social security number, their name, date of birth, and then you'll find them. I've only had one strange story to share with you, that an employer was looking up a member and found out that they were a benefit recipient. And that kind of confused us all. And here, this individual had collected a survivor benefit years ago, and we had record of that. So it looked rather interesting on the employer side. And thankfully, they called us and asked the question. That's what we always want you to do. If there's something that is doesn't look right, please ask those questions. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're here working in a partnership with you to ensure that we take care of our members. Even though on the employer side, you're electronically entering information on that manual demographic component of the website, we're still going to ask that a paper application be submitted. So that demographic lookup, you're inputting personal information, social security number, date of birth. Key is going to be email address. That is crucial to our success right off the get-go, because as soon as that is entered into our system, shortly thereafter, the member is getting a welcome to public safety email, encouraging them to use the website to make their irrevocable election. The intent of the paper document is just for us to double check the information, but ultimately the purpose of that P1 form is beneficiary information. So when you're entering that information on the website, you're not putting in the member's beneficiary elections. I would encourage, don't lose track of that paper form. Make sure that the member, turns it in, completes it, and we get that document into public safety, please. Pretty simple document, again, pretty intuitive. Key on this form, in my estimation, is going to be email address. I apologize for repeating myself, but I find that to be extremely important in all of our success so that we can get that information out to the member in a timely manner and they can take care of that election on their own. Tier 3, member has a couple options depending on whether or not you are a Social Security covered employer. So on the little flow chart we have here, the question is, will the employer pay into Social Security on behalf of the member? Well, if the answer is yes, again, the member has two choices. The member can elect a traditional pension defined benefit plan, which means they make contributions, you make contributions, you being the employer. Upon retirement, that member will collect that lifetime pension from public safety, as well as collect Social Security income in the future. The member has another choice if you, the employer, are paying into Social Security. They can elect for a straight defined contribution plan. They put in a contribution, you make a contribution. Upon retiring, ultimately the member walks out the door with 2 buckets of money, yours, theirs, and in the future they'll have Social Security retirement as well. On the other side, the answer to the question is no. We are not a Social Security covered employer. Once again, the member has two choices. They can elect a hybrid plan. Hybrid basically meaning partially defined benefit with some defined contribution twists involved as well. So the member, if they chose that hybrid type plan, they make a contribution into the pension plan plus a defined contribution. The employer is also making those contributions. Upon retirement, they collect that lifetime pension, plus they walk out the door with a bucket of money. Or they can elect that straight defined contribution plan. Again, making that contribution in, the employer makes the contribution, they retire, they walk out with 2 buckets of money, and then they have to manage that for the rest of their life. Those are the choices that are available. They're tough choices, but you know, it's nice to have options. Please remember that the member is making this decision. It's theirs and theirs alone. It is an irrevocable decision. It can never be changed regardless of the situation. And that's pursuant to IRS code as well. So it's a solid answer coming out of our organization. There's no employer or local board involvement in making this decision. It's solely on the member. The member is going to make that declaration on the employer portal. They would elect which choice that they're choosing, again, for the remainder of their career in public safety. In the event the member fails to make an election, there's an automatic default into the defined benefit plan. Plenty of educational materials out there. We've got a couple awesome 5-minute YouTube videos that explains defined benefit versus defined contribution, goes into some detail about the hybrid plan. I think they're very helpful. We've got various written literature on our website. Currently, we have a private entity under contract to assist with the education of our members, Public Safety Financial Galloway. A member can easily make a phone call, chat with one of the consultants at Public Safety Financial Galloway, and try to get some direction that way as well. We as an organization do not endorse any financial service providers. Again, we have a contract with Public Safety Financial Galloway to assist us in this. A member can chat with anyone they wish to make this decision. But again, it's theirs and theirs alone. As I mentioned earlier, when the employer uploads the information on that demographic file, quickly an email goes out to the member welcoming them to the plan and encouraging them to enroll in their members only account. Periodically, we will send out emails to that member to remind them to make that choice. They're going to get an email at a 30, a 60, and an 80-day interval. We're definitely pushing them, but we'd rather see them make that choice, actively make that choice in lieu of defaulting. Members have that option between a defined benefit plan, lifetime, retirement income, a defined contribution plan, which again, they have to manage and figure out how that's going to last them for the rest of their life. Or that hybrid plan, which is kind of a combination of both for those individuals who do not participate in the Social Security program. Contributions. This is a public pension plan. We, the member, make contributions into the Members are required to pay into the plan, as is the employer. What's unique about Tier 3 is it's a 50-50 plan. In other words, whatever the member is contributing, the employer contributes basically the same amount, anywhere between 9 and 11% for that defined benefit member. Contributions, member contributions that come into the plan are tax deferred. So by virtue of paying into the public safety retirement plan, that member is reducing their taxable income as an active member. But let's remember, on the backside, upon collecting retirement benefits from public safety, that income will be taxed. That hybrid plan, the member again is going to make anywhere between that 9 and 11 defined benefit contribution, and then they're going to make a 3% contribution into a defined contribution plan, and the employer will match that as well. That defined contribution plan, the member contributes 9%. The employer contributes 9%. However, if that member wishes to contribute more than 9%, they can do so, but the employer is going to cap out at that 9% of pensionable wage. An employee, a member, maybe they elect 15% right off the get-go, and after a couple months of making those contributions, they're thinking, what did I do here? Again, they do not have the ability to change that amount. Once they make that election, it is irrevocable. As I mentioned earlier, member makes contributions, as does the employer. The exception, as far as what the employer is kicking in, it's a 50-50 match, would be that legacy for Tier 1 and Tier 2. I can't say enough about getting those payrolls into us in a timely manner. I guess I've had a few phone calls with folks throughout the state reminding you that there's a statutory time frame to get those contributions into public safety. So I've had plenty of phone calls. Now a lot of you folks get the opportunity to see what I look like. So please, let's take care of this reporting and get that money into the plan in a timely manner. Pensionable compensation limits. As a part of the Tier 3 legislative changes, the state of Arizona has placed a salary limit on contributions coming into the plan. So when it first started, we were looking at about $110,000 per year, that if a member stayed under that, contributions were accepted for the entire 12-month period. It's a calendar year test. However, in the event that the member exceeds that amount, contributions for both the employee and employer would cease once that limit's obtained. As of 1/1 of 21, that limit has increased to $115,868, and that does change every 3 years. So again, once a member exceeds that limit, both employee and employer contributions cease for the balance of the year. That employer legacy payment ceases, disability payments cease as well. On the employer side, in the event that you have a member who's exceeding that limit, we'd ask that you go into that demographic page and do an update indicating a code of CL, contribution limit, with whatever date they hit that. Therefore, the system is no longer looking for contributions on behalf of this member. We'd ask that around the first of the year, you go back into the system as of 1/1, let's hit resume service. Therefore, the system is once again looking for those contributions on behalf of that member. Very few members in Tier 3 do reach that compensation limit, but it's out there and we just need to make you aware of it. Tier 3 defined benefit vesting, okay? I've got to be vested in a plan in order to collect a benefit. So under Tier 3, if I'm 55 with at least 15 years of credited service, I qualify for an unreduced lifetime pension. If I have 15 years of service at 52 and a half, I again qualify for a benefit, but it's going to be reduced. And that reduction, that penalty, is going to be applicable for the remainder of that member's a lifetime. It's not as if they reach age 50, 55 and then all of a sudden they get a raise. It doesn't work that way. Credited service is important to understand. That's when a member makes that biweekly contribution into the pension plan, they earn credited service. As far as the defined benefit plan goes, there's a formula that's utilized to determine that lifetime monthly benefit. Credited service times a multiplier in conjunction with that high five. That high five is going to be 60 consecutive months of salary within that 15-year or last 15 years of service. So it's more than possible. Your high five could have been early on in your career when you were working a lot of overtime. Maybe later on in your career, you just don't want to work that much OT. Always going to encourage a member to use the website to look at their pension, to wrap their head around it, to understand where that high five might be. We have a maximum in this program that once I've hit that 32-year benchmark, I'm going to cap out at 80% of my high five. So that's the highest across the board. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 is that 80% of my high 3 or high 5 or the equivalent of 32 years of service. In the event that that member in the defined benefit plan opts to separate service prior to age 55, 52, not collecting a lifetime monthly benefit, they can elect a withdrawal of their contributions plus 3% interest. For a Tier 3 member, the employer share is always going to stay with public safety as far as the defined benefit plan goes. So an example, kind of some simple math here. I've got a Tier 3 retirement example, 15 years of credited service at age 52 and a half. So that member has an average monthly salary of $6,250 or $75,000 a year. They had 15 years of credited service. Now in Tier 3, there's a graded multiplier. So at that 15-year benchmark, it starts off at 1.5% per year, and then gradually you'll see those multipliers increasing. We get to that 25-year benchmark, and that member or that multiplier is going to be 2.5% per year. So again, 2.5% times 32 is going to equal that 80%. So in this scenario, the member's got 15 years of service times that 1.5 graded multiplier, which is then going to equal 22.5% of their high five. So the high five is $6,250. 22.5% of that is going to equal a monthly pension of $1,406 for the rest of their life. But let's also take into consideration that $1,406 is prior to an early retirement reduction. So it's going to be even less than what we're looking at here. I've illustrated below, understanding the fact that the plan offers an automatic survivor benefit for your spouse, your surviving spouse. That auto survivor benefit, according to statute across all three plans, is going to be 80% of the member's benefit. So I think the numbers that we're looking at here for the early retirement might be a little bit higher because, again, the penalty for leaving early is not applied, and that survivor benefit looks like about $1,124, again, for the rest of that survivor's life. On the other side of the coin, if the member were to work 2.5 more years, age 55 with 17.5 years of credited service, we see that multiplier changing. It went from 1.5 to 1.75%. So now with that 2.5 years of service additional, they're looking at about 30.625% of that same high five. In that scenario, no reduction is applied because, again, full retirement age 55, that monthly benefit is about $1,914 a month, $500 a month more. And that survivor benefit, 80% of that is about $1,531. So we need to get into the heads of some of these people and just show them, and hopefully the members get online and understand this as well, that by working a little bit longer, you're increasing your overall retirement income for the remainder of your life. Kind of the same theory with the Social Security Administration. I can take it at 62 with a penalty, early retirement, or I can hang on to full retirement with no penalty. Personal choice, there's really no wrong answer, but I'm always going to encourage members to make informed decisions when it comes to understanding their retirement income. Again, the majority of our Tier 3 employers do not contribute to Social Security, so we're going to see a lot of our members having that, potentially looking at that hybrid account, receiving that pension plus that lump sum of cash upon separation of service. Tier 3 members do not have access to drop or deferred retirement like you're going to see in Tier 1, Tier 2. That automatic survivor benefit, which I will admit is somewhat expensive to the plan, provides 80% of the retiree's income payable to that surviving spouse for the remainder of their lifetime. The twist here is, as a retiree, I have to be married for at least 2 years as a retiree for my spouse to collect that automatic survivor benefit. And all of our benefit recipients across the plans are eligible for cost of living adjustments. So that base amount that you're looking at will grow over time through a cost of living. Tier 3, hybrid accounts. So our record keeper for the defined contribution account is nationwide. We've got a group of people that are involved in keeping an eye on those nationwide accounts and investments. That committee is going to include board members. We've got some administrative and investment staff on that DC committee as well. They're holding regular meetings. It's something that if you want to participate in, you can definitely watch those meetings and wrap your head around what this DC committee is all about. Members can elect however they want their money invested. You've got a wide variety of options. In the event that the member fails to make an election, large cap, mid cap, small cap, whatever vehicle they're after, in the event that they fail to do that, there's a target retirement date. And as a youngster, that money is mostly in the market. As I start to age, those percentages are less in the market and kind of moved around here and there. So my risk is a little bit less. So when you're younger, you can probably have a little bit more risk as far as investing goes. But as we get a little bit older, and I've got some gray hair here, so I'll definitely admit we may not be as risky in the market just because we've worked our whole careers to save this money, and we hate to see it go away. But again, it's the members' option on how they have their money invested. On that defined contribution account, money vests, or that employer share vests at 10% per year. So after 10 years in the plan, upon separation of service, I'd get all my money and I'd get all my employer's money as well. Upon separation, I can take that money in cash, which could be a little bit dangerous because of taxes, or I can do a direct rollover straight to another plan, never touches my hands. Therefore, I'm not paying taxes on this until later on in life. You can also leave the money with us and save it for a rainy day if you wish to do so. We offer other benefits at Public Safety, not just retirement. Based on this occupation of law enforcement and firefighting, we know that it's hazardous. And again, it's tough jobs. So we offer 4 different types of disability benefits. We've got an accidental, an ordinary, a temporary, or a catastrophic. Local board involvement is prevalent here when members are making applications for disability benefits. They're definitely talking to their local boards. Local boards have to make some determinations, and they're tough determinations on some of these various disability types. So an accidental disability, it's going to be job related, happened on the job as a result of my occupation. Physically or mentally unable to perform the duties of my position If I have less than 20 years on the job, which again, the vast majority of our tier 3 members do have less than 20 years. Let's remember July 1 of 17, that benefit is going to be non-taxed. We've got an ordinary disability that's non-job related. Now, if I'm eligible for a normal retirement, I am not eligible for an ordinary disability. And again, that's across all 3 tiers. Physically unable to perform reasonable duties, or I'm permanently and totally disabled as a result of a psychological impairment that is going to prevent me from engaging in substantial gainful activity. And that is similar to what the Social Security Administration abides by. Substantial gainful activity means that you're basically removed from the labor market as a whole. We also offer a temporary disability benefit, again, duty related. I can't be eligible for a normal retirement benefit. Physically or mentally prevents me from a reasonable range of duties, but is temporary in nature and indicating that I will be limited to 12 payments, again, non-taxable event. We've got that catastrophic disability, duty related, physical condition only, that is permanent and total in nature, and again, prevents me from engaging in substantial gainful activity. That's going to be a non-taxable event for the first 5 years. Accidental, catastrophic, and ordinary, the member shall file an application after the event or within 1 year after the member has terminated as a result of that disability. So please remember that. Disability provisions in the defined contribution plan, pretty much the same thing. Let's remember that as a part of the DC plan, both the employee and employer are paying a premium of 0.88% of pensionable wage to have this disability coverage. Again, same determination. The twist is going to be that the ordinary disability, non-job related, is not on the table, and that there's going to be an offset based on that account value in their defined contribution account. So they may not receive the full benefit by virtue of having money in that DC account. Survivor benefits in the event that the member is killed in the line of duty or does not survive an injury sustained in the line of duty, the surviving spouse will receive 100% of the member's pensionable wages for their lifetime. For a non-duty death, that spouse will receive a benefit equal to 80% of that accidental disability calculation, plus there's going to be survivor benefits for dependent children as well. Same thing with the defined contribution plan, again, given the nature of this occupation. In the event that a DC member is killed in the line of duty or does not survive an injury from a line of duty event, that surviving spouse will receive, again, a lifetime payment. But once again, you'll see that amount offset by the value of their defined contribution account. In the event that the member is killed in the line of duty, those employer contributions are vested immediately. So they have both member and employer dollars. As I mentioned earlier, increases as a part of Prop 124 that was voted upon by the taxpayers in the state of Arizona. There is an increase to Tier 3 benefits. It's COLA based on Consumer Price Index for the Phoenix Mesa region. Increases are capped at 2%. Increases are payable to a Tier 3 member after 7 years of receiving a benefit or reaching age 60. That increase is also dependent upon our funding levels. So there's a couple extra variables involved in determining those increases. Beneficiaries, something near and dear to my heart. I can't say this enough about members making sure that their beneficiaries are up to date. When I started this job, I was single. Now I'm married. I need to update my beneficiaries. I recently had an employer reach out to me based on a unique situation. This employer is going to send beneficiary information to all of the police officers and firefighters within this employer, just based on a situation. I would encourage, if you're willing to do so, let's get those records update. Let's make sure that, especially the single people, their money goes to who they want it to go to. So as far as I'm concerned, beneficiaries are huge, primary and secondary, personally speaking. My spouse is my primary beneficiary, but the 4 kids, don't tell them, are my secondary beneficiaries. So if something happens to my spouse and I at the same time, automatically all the kids are in good favor with dad right now, would receive equal shares of the account balance. People, entities, trusts, you've got a lot of different options when it comes to designating beneficiaries. So I'm going to close with a unique situation. A member was hired after July 1 of 17, which again made them a tier 3 member. After 1 year, they terminated and accepted a lump sum distribution. They refunded their account. Shortly thereafter, the member comes back to a PSPRS covered position. How is this handled? Well, the member already made an irrevocable decision, whether it was their defined benefit or defined contribution. The 90-day period has already elapsed. They've already done this once. They're not going to do it again. So in this situation, the employer and the member contributions resume immediately at the previously elected plan and rate. So just in the event you find yourself in that unique situation, they've already gone through the 90 days, they've already made their declaration, day 1, they start making those contributions into the plan. Do I have any questions? Any questions?
Phil, yes, we do. We have our first question on the line. Does the 2-year marriage rule apply only to retirees or active members or survivor benefits?
I believe the 2-year rule is applicable to retirees, that I have to be married for at least 2 years in order to collect that 80% of the retiree's benefit for the rest of my life. I don't think that there's a vesting schedule per se for an active died, especially a duty died member. Again, based on the nature of the occupation, coverage is on day 1, which is, again, a good thing for the plan and for the members.
Question number 2, how common are temporary disability payments? And are there any examples of when this type of disability benefit is used?
I've not seen many of them, but let's remember I've not been here for a long period of time. Again, they're uncommon. You know, maybe the member has a shoulder injury and the physicians are uncertain, you know, post-surgery, whether that rotator cuff is going to heal well enough for that individual to go back to work. So it's feasible, you know, that temporary could be a good choice for them. Always going to encourage a member in that scenario to ask questions of the local board secretary to determine, well, what if that temporary, what if this is going to be permanent? You know, what are my options as far as going from temporary to accidental? Those questions need to be asked. And again, we're here to help out to the best of our abilities as well.
Phil, we have another question on the line. What happens with a tier 2 member leaving the system, taking a refund, and then getting rehired into a public safety or another position here? Would he be tier 2 or a tier 3 employee?
Well, I might need a little help on this one from my TAG team here. My gut is telling me one thing, but every now and then I do make an error.
This is Robert Ortega. To answer the question, tier 2, if that member is to refund, under our statutes, anytime someone refunds or forfeits out of the plan, they forfeit all of their benefits to the plan. So they would no longer be considered a tier 2 member. However, there are instances within statute that if an individual who terminates employment takes the refund, then returns back to the same employer within a specific time frame and specifically 90 days, then they would go back into the tier that was in effect at the time that they took the refund. They won't get the service, they'll just get merely the tier. If they want that service that they forfeited, they would have to go through a service purchase process. But for the high majority of individuals, the moment you take a refund out of the plan, you forfeit all rights and benefits. So if you were to be rehired, you would be in the tier that's in effect at the time of your reemployment.
Thank you, sir.
And it looks like we have time for about one or two more questions. We're keeping our lines open. And with that, we'll be taking a short break and returning at 12:30, or excuse me, at 10:30 for a presentation by Local Board Relationship Manager Joann Lowey, who will be covering public safety high 3 and 5-year salary calculations and retirement paperwork. Thank you. Back, we're here with Joann Lowey, Local Board Relationship Manager. Ms. Lowey is a 27-year PSPRS employee and is going to be walking through the public safety high 3 and 5-year salary calculations and retirement paperwork presentation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 2021 annual PSPRS conference. I am Joann Lowey. I'm the Local Board Relationship Manager. I've been with public safety, as Christian said, over 25 years. And one of my roles here was as a retirement specialist. When I first moved into benefits, there were 2 of us processing retirements monthly. This was back when retirement applications were handwritten and manually calculated. And we were trying to get the local boards to use our new retirement spreadsheets instead. And a printed version of contribution history was the only way for anyone to find a member's highest years. Back then, it was helpful if the calculation was broken out by a 3-year date and money range, because then if there's any calculations that were off or part of it that was off, we could narrow down the date range and contact the local board. With help of some really great people in the retired members department, including me, thankfully, and the IT department, we've been able to develop better ways to help find the highest years. And when it comes to retirements, just to let you know, the 10th of the month has been our cutoff since I've been here with public safety retirement. Our office, the retired members department, needs time to review the documents, received, assign it to staff for entry, and then staff needs to manually enter the information into our system. Once it's entered, it is actually reviewed, each file. After the 10th, we only have about 5 days to enter in a couple hundred retirements, and then 1 to 2 days for either 1 or 2 people to review. Then accounting has to do their part of the retirement process, so the funds are available on the last working day of the month to all of our retirees. Today, I'm going to walk through what is available and how to use the resources we have to run a calculation, and a review of the retirement paperwork. So first, I want to show you the references that we're going with regarding a retirement calculation, the terms that we use, and other resources, which is the summary of plan provisions, the local board retirement manual, retirement spreadsheets, local board portal. This is information and places that you can go to find out about the calculations and the different types of benefits. So when it comes to finding the highest years, each tier is different. Tier 1, it's highest 3 consecutive years within the last 20 years of credited service. Tier 2, it's the highest 5 consecutive years within the last 20 years of credited service. And Tier 3, it's the highest 5 consecutive years within the last 15 years of credited service. And I've noted the statute reference where we're getting that information from. So the key components of a retirement is getting the date of retirement, getting that retirement estimate, finding that high 3 or high 5 consecutive years, reviewing contribution history, years of service, leaves without pay, and prior service. What impacts that total salary? Well, first of all, it's credited service. So that is the member's hire date to the date of retirement, and contributions are posted for every single one of those pay periods. Anytime there is during that service that there are pay periods that there are no contributions, those are added up and tracked as missing pay periods. Pensionable salary affects this, and so do, again, the consecutive years, high 3 or high 5. So the local board portal is the resource for gathering this information. So once you go into the local board portal, you're needing to know the member information and estimated date of retirement. You can then review the contribution history, review the pay periods, and review milestones. Once you get into the local board portal and review looking at the highest year's estimate report, it's going to show member information and milestones. I love milestones because, as in this example, I can see that the member hasn't reached 20 years of service yet. So it's going to give me the milestones of 20, 25, and 32 years of service, an estimated monthly benefit, and then the dates that the member is going to be eligible potentially for each of those milestones based upon service. The next thing you're going to need to look at is the service information in the service box. The important thing to look at there is the hire date and service date. Now, this is for a tier 1 member, so the dates are going to be the same, but you'll need to check that and be sure that according to your records, it's correctly noted in ours. Our information is only as good as what we were provided by the employer via the membership form. So if something is not correct about that date, then please reach out to our office because then we can correct it. We can make sure that there are contributions posted on record that align with that date of hire. Because some of our employers have one record for that employee, but the employee may have worked in a corp designated position for a while and then went to a public safety eligible position. That is 2 separate retirement plans, and the employee service cannot be combined as far as that service date. When you're reviewing the information within the local board portal and the highest or in the retirement estimator, you also want to look at contributions. There is a spot that you can click on that will give you the information regarding the most current contributions posted to the member's record to review. And you're also going to want to look at the pay period endings that is being used in the highest years. That list is on that page with the retirement estimator. What you want to look for is anything that's showing projected. And as you can see in this example, there are 4 pay periods that are showing projected, and it's an estimated amount for each one of those pay periods. So what we want to do is try to get those numbers to be with a little bit more within reason. So if the contribution is not posted through the member's date of retirement, it's going to show projected if the high 3 is running current. And as those contributions are posted, that high 3 will shift to potentially include that posted contribution that are still coming. There is a link on the screen that you can click on to add an employee contribution. And this is to help kind of eliminate that projected amount because that could be inflated. And we're trying not to have that use that inflated amount if at all possible. And this is how the screen, here's how you will see it as it appears on the screen in the local board portal. The add EE contribution is right there below the last contribution received. Now, in order to get an estimated amount, I'm going to either review the contribution history because it does have a list of the employee contributions that are there. It shows the pay period ending last posted because this is all money that is actually received and posted. But what it also shows is a post date. That's key also in looking to see what's my pay period and when could I possibly see that money posted to the member's record. Looking at this example, it's about 5 days from the date of pay, from the pay period ending date to the post date. So you can kind of see how long it might take and based upon the contributions that are still estimated to be received. Or I'm going to look at the list of the pay periods that are being used in the high three. I'm going to kind of glance at the pay periods, usually within the fiscal year. I'm not going to go back farther than that because typically those contributions are less. So I'm going to look for a reasonable amount that I'm going to use as opposed to leaving that projected amount showing as part of the highest three. So in this case, I have 4 pay periods that I'm going to use a lower amount to run the highest years in order to then not have it as inflated. Because I don't know about you, I'd rather have something that I'm providing the member that's a little bit less. So that way, once everything is posted, it's like you're reaching out back out to the member and you're going, okay, now it's everything's posted and now it's a better number and it's higher. If you leave those projected amounts there, it's going to be, again, possibly inflated. And that's when you're going to get a call from a retired members department that now all contributions are posted. You need to revise that calculation. Whether you leave the projected there or you use the estimated amount that's lower, if contributions are not posted, you're still going to have to rerun that calculation to be sure once contributions are posted that what the member is currently receiving is within reason. And once you do enter those into the ADD contribution boxes, it'll show that something was entered. So you can track which ones you've actually entered and estimated at a different amount. So now we're going to cover retirement spreadsheets. So the retirement spreadsheets are going to be found from the main page of the website under Forms and Resources, Employers, and then there's a whole list under retirement spreadsheets of the public safety and corp retirement spreadsheets that are used on an everyday basis by the local boards. So what information is needed? And I've broken it down to 2 different ways, 2 different areas that we're doing this. From the member, we're going to need benefit type, retirement date, personal information, spouse name, date of birth, date of marriage, address, children, their date of birth, and email address and phone number, payment information, and beneficiary information. The other part of the information that's needed is going to be from the local board portal or employer records. Employment information, compensation, leaves without pay, prior service, industrial leave. And what I did here too is I know you have looked at this spreadsheet multiple times on the input tab, but I'm breaking it down to 2 different sections basically. So the first section is all member information. So from personal information to dependent children, date of retirement, type of benefit, that's for the member to let you know. The middle part is the information that's from the local board portal and from the employer. So retiree information down to industrial leave. And then we're back again to the bottom half of that input tab, and we've got payment information and beneficiaries that are provided by the member. So I know when you work with the members, you are informing them that public safety pays based upon the date of retirement. You're retiring in January, you're effective with public safety in February, and the pay on the last working day of the month. What is also noted, and I know we go through these retirement spreadsheets and the paperwork, and we sometimes don't really notice what's there. The application on the P4 page 1 at the very top of the page does let the member know that information also. So it's the member's retiring on, they're acknowledging that they're effective with public safety the first day of the month following the date of retirement, with payments beginning on or about the last day of that month, provided that my local board has met and provided my eligibility and approved my eligibility and pension benefits. and that they're going to be submitting the completed documents to public safety by the 10th of the month. Also in the Form P4 at the very bottom is what we're looking for is copy of the supporting documents, and here's the list. So one of the items that I know we've been focusing on is recorded marriage license or certificates. So what I've provided here is examples of the recorded marriage certificate. So as you can see, it notes somewhere on a marriage license that it's recorded, and it's either a book and page or it's signed by the deputy clerk. It's either a stamp potentially on the back of the document. There's a variety of ways, but somewhere it has to note that it was recorded by the county in which it was received, which originally issued it. Now here's a copy that we have of a sample of the marriage license that is not recorded. So as you look at this document from top to bottom, what you're noticing, you can see the date it was issued by the county. You can see the date of the marriage, but nowhere on there is it noting that it was returned to the county and recorded. So while this document looks really nice, if this is what we have on file when the primary member passes away, it will hold up the pension being paid to the survivor because we don't have a copy of a recorded marriage certificate. So we'd rather not do that, but it will hold it up. So that's why it's important that when the retirement paperwork is submitted to get to us the copy of the recorded marriage license. This is the Form P4. This is page 2 of the application. So this is where the member signs and dates. And this is also where the notes the member's date of termination. So when it comes to retro payments, which doesn't normally come into play with a normal retirement, this is where we're going to look is the date that the member made application for this benefit. The Form P12, if you notice at the top of the Form P12, it does note the date retired and also date first payment due. So this is another resource for the member to review to ensure that they understand they may have retired in January, but their first payment is in February. Also on the Form P12, we have the area down there where it says the local board has met on, and they provide a date to determine that the applicant is eligible for the benefit payment. This helps retired members know that they have the paperwork, it's complete, they have, the local board has met, and so they are good to go ahead and set up this pension for payment. The Form 13, direct deposit. Under payment information on the input tab, the payment method does need to be switched to direct deposit. At that point, the Form 13 should appear. So the Form 13 is all about direct deposit. Now with that Form 13, we do need a voided check or a letter from the financial institution that notes clearly and legibly the bank account routing number and a copy of the driver's license, member's driver's license. If we don't have that information, then that member's first benefit will be in the form of a check until we do get the supporting documents along with that Form 13. The Form P16, the return to work acknowledgement. On this form itself, please be sure that each line item is initialed by the member. And this is a good resource for everybody to try to grasp that return to work concept. There is some good information in here. And again, it's just another one of those resources that also might help with that return to work, which of course I'll be talking about later today. The Form W4P, retired members actually has reached out a couple times and said, can you just be sure that local boards know that this form, there's 2 parts to this form, or that needs to be complete? So that's why I included it in this example. So on the Form W4P at the bottom of the page, if the retiree does want taxes withheld, they do need to mark one of those boxes. Single, married, but at the higher single rate. And off to the right there, they need to note the number of allowances. Now, they don't need to be perfect. They can do, it's up to them what they want to put in there, because once they start receiving that monthly benefit, they can review their direct deposits to see if what dollar amount is being withheld is reasonable what they need for their taxes. And they can change it at any time in the future by the 10th of the month. Now, Form 8, again, we go through these forms, we have the members fill them out, and we sign as witnesses or just make sure that the form is completely filled out. But there is some good information on some of these forms. When it comes to the Form 8, it's noting that the survivor and the eligible children are automatically by statute going to be paid if there's any of those 2 sources that are eligible. The time the Form 8 is going to come into play is if there are no eligible spouse, no eligible children, and there's a balance of contributions remaining after all benefits are paid. So that's where this source is. We're going to go for that source of who might receive those payments. And again, they have to make application, and the local board does have to approve. When there's a balance of contributions, that means that's what we call a death benefit. So when it comes to the retirement process, the member partners with the local board secretary. They review the information in the local board portal, review the local board secretary reviews the contribution history, start the retirement spreadsheet, get members' personal information, including copies of date of births and date of marriage, complete the spreadsheet, retirement spreadsheet, print, review, and sign. And don't forget, when you print, review, and sign, there are 2 of you that are working on this spreadsheet, the local board secretary and the member. Review the information, whether you print it and review it, whether you review it per tab, review the information. It is a manual process. And like we do here, when we enter it, we have somebody reviewing it when we're done. You can send it to me and I can review it, but I'm going to be reviewing and making sure that the Form P11 works. All the other information, yes, I do review all the other forms too to make sure, like the W4P has everything filled in, but review it. You're the first eyes on this information. Make sure the local board is meeting prior to the 10th of the month to approve that retirement, and send the packets to public safety. And if you have any questions about the retirement process, I can always help. Retired members can help also. And when it comes to submitting the retirements and enter drops, the retired members department has created a new email address to receive those documents. And it's here on the screen, approvedretdocs@psprs.com. And please scan and email the complete documents no later than the 10th of the month. And remember that local board meeting minutes must still be sent certified mail. They haven't updated the statutes yet, but they have proposed legislation to do that so that those minutes can be sent via email. So yeah, keep in mind every month that the retired members department is processing a couple hundred new retirements. And these couple hundred new retirements are added to the total number of retirees that may have questions and concerns regarding direct deposit, taxes, 1099-Rs that we issue for their pensions, any insurance and cancer insurance. So retired members department is answering calls and emails from all of those retirees and local boards. So please be kind and review the retirement documents before submitting to that approved retdocs@psprs.com.
Thank you, Joanne. And with that, we're going to be opening up the line for questions, and we have already several in the queue. Question number one, sometimes not all the information, such as beneficiary, beneficiary information, social security, and date of birth, do not always populate to all forms. Why is this?
Honestly, because it's an Excel spreadsheet, I am not 100% sure. There's always, you can always print that form and have the member manually complete it. The form is also listed under common change forms if it's not printing correctly from the retirement spreadsheet, and the member can manually enter in the information that's needed in that form.
Excellent. Joanne, question number two. If an employee was suspended without pay for a couple of days, but not an entire pay period, would there be any impact on PSPRS benefit eligibility or calculations?
There is not, because if the member was only a couple days out of that 14-day time frame, so we're still getting contributions on record for that pay period. So the member still has credited service for that time.
Joanne, with regards to needing a recorded marriage certificate, how do we deal with a marriage that occurred outside of the United States?
Oh, that part, I've seen some international marriage certificates, and so that's where the individual is going to have to ensure that they have the proper copies. A lot of times what happens is they have if it's from a country that the language is not English, so you can't really read what's happening on that form. I have seen where the country or the U.S. Has provided a document that actually is in English for it. So, and sometimes we do get those documents, marriage certificates that are from Mexico. And so sometimes we go to internal staff here who can actually highlight those specific areas of that document so that we can see that it has been recorded. So yeah, it would be up to the member to provide that information to us, so that way we do have a correct document for that.
And next question, if there are beneficiaries like a spouse, do local boards and employers still need to complete Form 8?
Yes, we do like to have that on record, because ultimately what's happening, it's a resource for us for a couple different things. It is for, like I said, mention any remaining contributions, but in that case, the spouse would be receiving that surviving spouse benefit potentially. But it's also for those times where the member passes away and there's no surviving spouse, or it's a resource for us to do that last pension payment, because we have to go back to that Form 8 in order to assign that last pension that got kicked back to us because the bank closed the account. We want to pay somebody that money. So typically it is to the survivor, but if the survivor's not, if the survivor's already predeceased, then we're still going to go to that form to see who can we pay that last pension to.
Excellent, Joanne. I'd like to pass along a very nice compliment. It reads, Joanne, I just wanted to thank you for all of your assistance in processing applications and answering questions during the pandemic. You have been fantastic, and your assistance is greatly appreciated. With that, I'll swing right into one of our next questions. Is the 10th of the month still critical if someone is entering drop?
Yes, it is. But like I've told the local boards in the past, it's better to wait for all contributions to be posted so you can get that accurate high 3 for that individual who's entering drop. So while yes, still keep the 10th of the month in mind, typically if you do need, you can take until the end of the month. But there's always that one time where we need that information at least by the 10th of the month, and that's during fiscal year cutoff. So we always have the members who enter drop in May, so they're effective in our office in June, so we do need those documents as soon as possible around fiscal year. Otherwise, the end of the month, or at least after all contributions are posted, is always good.
Joann, next question. How does the industrial leave portion apply in the worksheet? Is that data necessary?
It is, because if the member's highest consecutive years includes that industrial time, then we know that there's a specific date range that we need to go, okay, what portion of those pay periods includes the industrial time, and were the contributions less than normal? Then if they were, then we're going to reach out and find out what the base salary is, because we can use that for the high 3 consecutive or high 5 instead of what was actually posted. So the industrial leave is important for us to be able to know, okay, why are these contributions on the high 3 a little less? Oh, it's industrial. So let's figure out what that base salary is, and we'll have to manually readjust that high 3 total salary or high 5.
And if there are any additional questions out there, now's the time to play Stump the longtime PSPRS veteran, Joann Lowey. And with that, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds until we're going to close and take a break to our next presentation. Please hang in there. Joann, we have a question. Is there ever a point where an employee who states they're entering drop are no longer able to change their entry date?
There is. If the local board has already met and determined that they're eligible, if contributions are all posted, then the member, there's no turning back. We can review that record on a case by case to see what's happening with it. If contributions are not posted, I'm trying to think of the other, I think that's the main reason, because once everything has been approved and contributions are posted, then that's it. Everything is good to go as far as we're concerned. And once we receive it and enter it into our system, it's definitely not going to have that opportunity to rescind that drop.
And we're going to keep it open for a few more seconds to see if any more questions come in. Okay, and with that, we're going to take a short break till 11:15. When it is 11:15, and insurance team lead Annette Jorgensen is going to be giving her presentation on cancer insurance and health care insurance subsidies.
All right. New territory. For those of you who are new to the subsidy game, there's basically retirees and survivors have the option with our retirement system for subsidy that is meant to help subsidize the cost of their insurance. There's subsidy through Arizona State Retirement System and our retirement, but insurance is varying depending on where a member worked as an active employee. Therefore, as you see on this screen, there's ASRS, Arizona Department of Administration, and retiree or COBRA coverage offered through their former employer. Those are the three sources of insurance that a member may submit for subsidy on. All of our systems have subsidy available, and depending on who a retiree retired from, it could vary in the amounts of subsidy. We'll come to a chart in a minute. It's based on the type of coverage, whether it's family or it's single, and whether or not the member is at a Medicare status, which for us is age 65 and older. Elected official members, as I mentioned previously, they have to have at least 5 years of credited service before they're eligible for subsidy, and the amount of their subsidy is reduced for any years under 8. This is a quick chart of the subsidy. It's $150 for single if they're not Medicare. If it's family coverage, which for us, family coverage can be one dependent or more dependents. It's a total of $215 if nobody on the plan is Medicare. Sorry, $260 if nobody is Medicare. It starts going down, as you can see, as people turn Medicare. So a single, for example, if it's just a single member on coverage, they would go down from $150 to $100. And if it's family coverage and just one person is Medicare on the plan, it's $215. $170 is the amount, the lowest it would go down for dependent coverage if everybody on the plan is Medicare. For purposes of understanding what we consider health insurance, for now, that definition stands with just medical and dental coverage. So vision, life insurance, other insurances that you might offer to your retirees, we would not subsidize. How a member gets the subsidy. The first item on here is if they're going to apply for the Arizona State Retirement Group Plan, which is a form they fill out, they would fill out that form and return it to our office. We would take the premium that's needing to be paid, and we would reduce that premium by the amount of subsidy appropriate. For example, if their premium for a non-Medicare plan is $825, we would take the single $150 subsidy and subtract that from the $825. That difference would come out of the member's pension. They wouldn't need to request subsidy in any other format. If it's from an employer coverage, the employer would send us a request for that subsidy. We would send subsidy to the employer directly. Depending on an employer, there still may be where we're reducing the amount of premium and taking the difference out of the pension. Most of employers don't choose to do that because it's a plan where the member has to prepay for their coverage. So we just send the subsidy and the employer works it out with the member on how they get that credit. If a member is going to select Arizona Department of Administration or ADOA coverage, they would select and utilize the formats that ADOA offers. My understanding is they're basically only doing online. If a member does not have that ability, they do have forms that they can send to the member, but the member does work with Arizona Department of Administration directly. We get a report every month to show us who's on the plan. A member can also be eligible for more than one subsidy. For example, if they retire from public safety and they go work for another agency and get another retirement through Arizona State, for example, they would get their public safety subsidy and their Arizona State subsidy. As I mentioned previously, a member is age 65. Traditionally, that means they're eligible for Medicare at that age. Our office, just in case anyone is wondering, does send out communication to all of our members, regardless of what insurance they're on, at least 2 months prior to them turning 65, to let them know that subsidy will be dropping. Retired members who work for another agency can also have that agency submit a request for subsidy. Keep in mind that if it's an active plan, your agency would need to figure out or decide how to handle any tax implications from giving them this benefit. The other thing to keep in mind as far as timing, if you are rehiring a retiree who retired from you, it could take a little bit of time before that subsidy starts because there would need to be minutes sent to us, and there would need to be approvals made by personnel in our office before we could send that subsidy. Basically, for our department, these are some of the important things that we do. We gather information from the employer groups on the options that they have available for their retirees. We assist retirees who call or come into our office. Right now with COVID, we know that's not something happening, but if a member comes to the office, we would help them in the past and help to resolve whatever issue that they have. Retirees can, we also help them resolve eligibility issues. For example, we may get a notice from United Healthcare that a member is soon to be expired from their plan because they signed up for another plan. This happened with a lot of members this last enrollment. And what we do is we try to help the member as best we can from our side to be able to resolve that issue. If you need any questions answered, the best way to contact us is to send it to our benefits group so that there's more than one person in contact and more possibilities of getting a quick answer. Or you can call our office. Extension 5011 gets you to the retired members department. Okay, so switching over to the cancer insurance program. The cancer insurance program was created in 1997 and started with our firefighters. It was created to help active and retired members offset expenses or that were related to their cancer diagnoses or treatment. Peace officers were soon added in 2007, and then correction officers were also added back in 2014. The public safety members who are active are automatically enrolled in the program. There's no enrollment for them. They don't have to sign any forms to be in the program. There is options for correction officers. They can choose to enroll and participate or choose to not participate. Currently, elected official members are not part of this program. What you as employers really should be doing is making sure that all of your members, whether retired or active, are aware that this program exists. We do bill the public safety employers annually in around July, August for each of their active members from that previous year. Corp employers would send us the listing of their active members to be billed from. And if there are members that are expired as far as being able to be in the plan without having to pay, we would be billing those people each year as well. All active members under public safety are in the program. If a member is retired, they get a calculation of 5 months for every year of credited service with coverage at no cost, including drop time. So if a member's taking the drop and they had 5 years added to their years of credited service in the drop period, that 5 years would also be added to their calculation. Members who are exhausting their 5 months for every year of credited service are sent out a letter just in case they did not know about the program. We're very proactive when it comes to that because we know that information sometimes doesn't get out there. They're made aware that the program exists and that if they did have a diagnosis to contact our office so that we can begin the process of not only getting their claims submitted, but also giving them the opportunity to continue the program beyond the credited service period. Corp members elect as they're active. If they elect to be in the program, they pay for that program, and their employers set up that payment in their payroll. And then, as I said previously, annually we would be just requesting a listing from the corp employer to let us know how many members and who has elected to be in the program. And we would then have them make a payment on all of the members, not just the individual members. They also notify us when there's new hires, if a member is elected to take the coverage, so that we can send a billing to them about for those new members that have elected coverage as well. If a corp member is retired and they aren't sure if they're eligible, they can contact our office. Normally what we would do is we would then go back to that employer they retired from and just clarify or make sure that they had elected coverage while they were working in order to be able to submit for claims. If you need any of the paperwork for submitting claims, you can go to our website, and under forms and resources, you'll find all of the cancer forms. If a member's not clear which forms to use, they can definitely contact our office and ask for the cancer insurance program, and we'll be happy to let them know where it is. If they are not able to do online, they would also contact our office and we could send in the mail the forms necessary to submit for a claim. On this page, there's a couple of emails you can use as well when submitting for questions or needing help with the cancer program. There's recently been an update to our plan documents. We used to have, when somebody got a cancer diagnosis, they got a $15,000 payment and that was it. We did enhance that. If a member gets more cancer or a new cancer and sends us proof of that cancer, they can submit for another diagnosis benefit of $7,500. And I believe that there's no exhaust on that. The only exhaust would be if they've reached their 100,000 limit that's under the plan. They also included the genomics and genetic testing for members who have that type of service. A lot of times, I believe insurances have a hard time paying for that. So this would be a nice benefit for members whose insurance says, you can do that if you want, but we're not going to pay for it. So that's a nice new benefit that they added. As always, if it is a benefit where they submit for out-of-pocket costs or they submit us receipts or some kind of proof showing that they paid for a service, we would only pay the amount that they actually had to pay. So that would mean if they only submitted us the doctor's bill and the doctor's showing the full charge for that service, we would request for them to also submit to us their insurance payment to show how much of that the insurance paid and what the member's actual out-of-pocket was for that. So a member may think they're going to get $1,000 and they end up only getting $40 because that's all their responsibility was for. Reimbursements for medical imaging is also a benefit that's been on the plan, and we just recently had it clearly defined to include different scans, such as PET scans. And then the new change that we just recently had some seminars on is the diagnosis of cancer benefit will no longer be paid out of our office to members who are either actively employed or are still within that 5 months for every year of credited service period. We would process the application as we always have, and then a check would be sent to the former employer, who would then have to issue the check to the member. This is relatively new, so existing claims that came in before we were able to get tax forms. We are in the process of getting our claims packets updated to include tax forms, but we're trying to reach out to employees, retirees, as they send us claims, to get a tax form to send with their payments to the employers so that they can have the amount of taxes come out that they so desire. And then correspondence, we would be sending duplicate correspondence out. The employer would get the letters to the employee that we would normally send out, and any information that we would normally just send to the member directly for them to then send to the member along with the payment that they would be submitting to the member. This is just a brief explanation of how you as an employer would handle submitting for these payments. You may have to add them to your payroll system if they're retired. Again, we're going to be handling getting the forms for you. But these first few, there may be a few that don't have them because it wasn't something that was required before. Tax form and retiree address will be provided to the employers, meaning that if we have a tax form for the retiree, we would send that to you. We would also send you all the information that we have as far as what the retiree's address is. It's considered a fringe benefit, so this is not pensionable. We did go over that, but if you have any more questions, you can contact our office and we'll be happy to research and get an answer back to you on that. This only affected the public safety members, just in case any of you are corp employers. So corp employers, you would not be handling these payments, only the public safety employers. And we've come to the end of this, so I guess now we can turn to questions.
Annette, we have several questions in the queue. We're going to start with question regarding health insurance subsidies. Question number 1, is a single survivor in PSPRS who is on Medicare eligible for health insurance subsidies?
Yes. Anyone who is receiving a pension, well, let me retract on that. A retired member or survivor are eligible for the subsidy. So as long as that survivor is getting a pension as a survivor, they're eligible for subsidy. But if it's a case where it's a death payment, where they're just getting a one-time payment, they would not be able to sign up for insurance and they would not be eligible for subsidy.
Thank you. Annette, on to cancer insurance. Can corp members elect to pay into the cancer insurance policy at any time throughout the year or only at open enrollment?
When they first get hired, they can make that election. And if at the time that they are first hired, they elect not to enter into the program, but then during the annual offering that the employer should be doing, they get the election chance to elect again, they may elect at that time. The only thing they cannot do is go in and out of the program. So once they've made the election to be in the program, they're in the program. I hope that helped.
Excellent. Annette, question number 2 regarding cancer insurance. Do corp retired members receive 5 months of cancer insurance coverage for years of credited service?
Yes, that is something that we have currently discussed and changed policy on. We were not offering that before, but it was something that was discussed, and we have made a determination that they should get it. So they would get that same courtesy as a public safety retiree.
Currently, the enrollment form for cancer insurance notes that an electronic signature cannot be accepted. Does PSPRS plan on getting this updated at some point?
I'm seeing a head nod, yes.
Excellent. And do we have any additional questions? Please bear with me. And does the cancer insurance bill get calculated per the city's utilization rate, or does everyone pay a standard amount for cancer insurance coverage?
The billings we send out each year are based off of what the trustees have determined is an appropriate amount per active member. For example, currently it's $50 per active member. And we go from July of the previous year through June of the current year to look at who is active in the plan during that time period and did not quit before June 30th. All of the members on their active roster, we would send the billing for. We did change a little bit with this last year, and we required the employers to go to the online employer portal and approve their list of employees before we sent out the billings. But if we didn't hear back, we just sent the billing as per what we show as active members. So for example, the upcoming billing would be for July 2020 through June 30, 2021.
Annette, to confirm, if an employer has a public safety member who retired over 20 years ago who submits a cancer claim, then will it be the employer's responsibility to put this retiree back on the payroll to finalize and make payment on the claim?
Most likely, a member who retired 20 years ago would not be eligible for the program because unless they'd submitted for claims prior to their exhaustion, prior to their 5 months of every year of credited service being exhausted. So I think we calculated out with 20 years of credited service, that's about 10 years plus a little more, yeah. So someone who's retired 20 years ago, if this is the first time they've got a diagnosis of cancer, would not be eligible for the program.
And we're keeping our lines open for questions for Annette regarding cancer insurance and PSPRS health insurance subsidies. And with that, we're going to take a break. We're back. We're back with Local Board Relationship Manager Joann Lowey, who will be going over public safety return to work laws and the alternative contribution rate. Joann?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Regarding the public safety return to work, let's see if we can tackle this. In all the years that I've been in with public safety, I think the return to work has been one of the most challenging statutes to try and understand. I'm sure there have been many others through the years, but this one is the one that seems to be popping up. My goal is to explain what the local board needs to review so we can avoid what is in statute with regards to the return to work, which is the overpayments. Basically, it's an overpayment of the pension that's been paid to that retiree. So there have been a couple of boards who have experienced this retiree overpayment, but hopefully, and it usually means that the member has become reemployed by the same employer before waiting the required amount of days based upon the date of retirement. Okay, the date of retirement referred to in the public safety statutes is the first day of the month following the member's quit term date with the employer. It is not the date the member retired from the employer. It's defined in statute under 38-842, number 43. Retirement shall be considered as commencing the first day of the month immediately following the member's last day of employment. So as far as references, again, there's definitions that come into play with this part of the statute. It's not just about 38-849, paragraph E. And when it comes to trying to understand the statute, we've got the plan summary of benefits, the summary of plan provisions, the Form P16, and online, there is a reference to working after retirement. Here is the cycle of hiring a retired member. So the employer is hiring somebody who already retired from the plan. Now, this retiree could be retired from the same employer or retired from a different employer. It does require local board action, whether it's 12 months or 60 days or a different employer. It needs to determine if that position is public safety eligible or not, and in that case, if alternate contributions are payable or not. So the first part of the statute that we're going to tackle is the return to work, same employer, 12 months. I'm going to break this out to be 12 months or before 12 months and after 12 months from date of retirement, the first of the month following the member's quit term date with the employer. So this is if the retiree is hired before 12 months, the employer has hired a retired member, reemployed with the same employer from which they retired from before 12 months after the date of retirement, first of the month following, in any capacity or in same position, anytime following retirement, and is alternate contribution payable. Now the other one, well, let me go to this. So the local board needs to take action regarding the 12 months, before 12 months from date of retirement. Local board action needs to occur within 10 days if the reemployment is before 12 months. Does the retired member's pension need to be suspended? Yes, if reemployed before 12 months after date of retirement, first of the month following. And is there alternate contributions payable? Yes or no? Was the member retiree hired into a public safety eligible position? Yes, then alternate contributions are payable. If the retiree was not hired into a public safety eligible position, then no alternate contributions are payable. The same goes for after 12 months. So employer hires a retiree, same employer, after 12 months have gone by from date of retirement. Still have to go through the process. As the previous slide, hired a retired member, reemployed with same employer after 12 months in any capacity or in same position. Is there an alternate contribution payable? Are they in a public safety eligible position or not? Return to work, same employer, 60 days. So a retired member is hired by the employer. Did the retiree wait 60 days from date of retirement and compete in an open competitive new hire process, entry level, non-supervisory, or hired as a fire inspector or arson investigator, or receiving a disability and is hired under the Americans with Disability Act accommodations? So the 60 days open competitive is one part, or hired as a fire inspector or arson investigator, or Americans with Disabilities Act accommodation. So the local board needs to meet and determine, did the member meet the 60 days from date of retirement, which is the first of the month following when they're effective at public safety for their pension? Did they compete in an entry level, new position, non-supervisory? Because again, it's 60 days and they have to participate in that entry level, non-supervisory position. Was that position public safety eligible or not? So if it's public safety eligible, then alternate contributions are payable. If it is not a public safety eligible position, then no alternate contributions are payable. It's about the public safety eligible position. It's not about where that retired member can or cannot contribute as far as retirement, because they can never contribute to public safety ever again. So when it comes to submitting information to public safety, same employer, before 12 months, after 12 months, or 60 days. We're going to review here in our office local board minutes, date of rehire, the position title. We'll need to see old job description, which is what the retiree was doing prior to retirement, new job description. And in the minutes, it needs to note, is it public safety eligible position or not? And is there alternate contributions or not? And as you can see, side by side, we're doing the same information we need for both 12 months and for 60 days. Same employer. Now, return to work, different employer. So the retiree retires from City of Phoenix and goes to work for City of Mesa. Again, local board needs to take action because the employer of the plan, Mesa, has hired a retiree into a position. In what we're needing to do under a different employer is determine, is that member in a public safety eligible position or not? And is there alternate contributions payable or not? Again, it's the position, it's not where that retiree could possibly contribute to, since we know that that retiree is receiving a pension from public safety and can never contribute or receive another pension again. So here are some things to remember when it comes to return to work. Date of retirement, first day of the month following, starts that 12 months and starts that 60 days, not the date of retirement with the employer. It's all about, public safety statutes and how retirement is defined under our statutes. Is the member or the retiree being hired into a public safety eligible position? If it's ordinarily filled by an employee of an eligible group. Again, employee and eligible group are defined under 38.842. So you can look there to see, what are you talking about, public safety eligible position? And if the retiree is in the same position, so same position means similar duties, similar authority. He's at the same desk he was when he retired. There's a couple different ways I've heard it described through the years, but that part of the statute's been around for a while. And retired member. The the retired member has met requirements for pension and has terminated employment. Retired member again, or retiree, retirement is defined in statutes again. So the member does have to terminate employment to then potentially be reemployed in same employer or different employer. So the alternate contributions. Alternate contributions are payable to the plan when a retiree is hired into a public safety eligible position. The rate is calculated per employer and found in the individual employer actuarial valuation report each fiscal year. The employer shall immediately notify the local board after the employment of a retired member, and that is under the ACR part of the statutes 38843.05. Demographics will need to be updated in the employer portal, especially if they're with ACR being sent to the plan. We need to know that this person is a rehire, return to work. And is payable on contract fee when a retired member returns to work in a public safety eligible position. Again, those positions are defined in statute. Why is it needed? Statutes require it. Insurance subsidy. A lot of times when the retiree does go back to work for an employer of the plan, that active insurance costs much less than that retiree insurance. So the employer will send us the form, the ER sub form, to let us know that this individual is taking their active insurance. But then, like Annette said previously, that subsidy can't be paid until the local board has done their part to let us know that that they've hired a retiree, if the member's in a public safety eligible position or not, and if there's ACR payable or not. Because again, the retiree can never contribute or obtain credited service under public safety ever again. So under the return to work, if you have any questions, here are the individuals who can help with those questions. I don't think that, oh, that is it. Not sure where I stopped there, sorry. So if there's any questions about return to work, again, I've tried to break it out into different pieces: before 12 months, after 12 months, and 60 days. Because we don't want to have any overpayments, which means that the member started to work with a new employer, whether it's same employer same employer, before those 60 days or before that 12 months, then the pension should be suspended.
Joann, are we ready for audience questions?
Yes.
Okay, in order in which they were received. What should be provided to the local board when rehiring a retiree who is not in a PSPRS eligible position?
Same employer, non-public safety position, we need local board minutes, the date of rehire, the old job position, new job position, the noting that it is a non-public safety position and no ACR is payable. That can be noted in minutes. But if it's the same employer, that's what we're going to need, because they'll review that information here in our office regarding that same employer return to work. Different employer return to work, retiree in a non-public safety position, then we'll just need local board minutes for that, where it notes that a retiree was hired into a non-public safety position, so no ACR is due, so those local board minutes will inform us of that information.
And do any piece of information need to be provided to a local board during upon the rehiring of a retiree to a position that is not PSPRS covered? Certainly. What should be provided to the local board when rehiring a retiree who is not in a PSPRS eligible position?
That is actually for the local board and then the employer to review to see what information, because you need to communicate that to each other. The moment a retired member is hired, word needs to get to the local board. Now, how you do that, that's up to you, whether it's an email, whether it's a form that you create, just some sort of information, so that way that communication continues from the employer to the local board. Because the moment it doesn't is the moment that that local board is surprised when we're reaching out to them going, oh, we're needing to pay subsidy, but we can't until you, the local board, meets and takes action on this. So whatever it takes for that communication to keep going between the employer and the local board.
Just to kind of follow up a little bit more on that, I think it's important that employers and local boards understand that it is a partnership going forward. And it's a partnership in every regard that you as an employer are hiring a retiree at a PSPRS. So regardless of whether or not that hire action was in a covered PSPRS position or not, you employers should be coordinating with your local board on having them review the action that was taken. Because again, return to work provisions not only deal with whether or not the PSPRS retiree is returning to a PSPRS covered position, but whether or not there's any ACR components around that. And so regardless, employer, if you know that the position is not PSPRS covered, you should still be contacting your local board when you hire someone that you know is a retiree out of the PSPRS plans.
And next question. Joann, could you explain the major differences between the requirements for the 12-month period and the 60-day period?
There is no difference, if you notice, because what we're talking about on that notification of the plan, it's 12 months and 60 days, same employer. So anytime a retiree is hired, they need to meet either the 12 months, because if it's before, then we need to know they're being suspended. After 12 months, then we need to know that the retiree has been rehired, same employer. So yeah, there's no difference between what we're requesting for 12 months and 60 days, because it's still the same information, because the retiree has to meet that in order to continue to receive their monthly pension.
Are there any HIPAA or confidentiality requirements on what an employer can share with the PSPRS administrative staff, or otherwise, how can we share that information?
So typically we don't get any information regarding that requires HIPAA with regards to return to work. If it's regarding the disability and that part of the statute that is falling under the ADA, then we already know that the member's been retired under a disability. All the local board is doing is noting that they're hiring a retiree into whatever position it is, and if alternate contributions are due. And again, providing the information that's on either the 12-month or the 60 days, because in it's same employer, but it's under the ADA provision. But we don't typically get any information that's HIPAA regulated with regards to the return to work.
Thank you, Joann. What responsibilities does a former employer of a retiree have when that retiree returns to work for a different employer?
They don't, because it's all about the retiree and where they're now going to be hired under or with. So the former employer does not have to worry about any sort of return to work action unless, again, they're hiring the same, the retirees hired from the same, retired from the same employer. A different employer, it's about the employer that the member is now working for. And those two things that need to be addressed, public safety position or not, an ACR or not.
And Joann, you spoke a little bit before about the position of fire inspector. Is that a PSPRS or ASRS covered position?
That, again, that's part of the statute that allows the member to return to work under, which is the arson investigator or can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but that's, once the member is hired into that position, remember, they can never contribute to public safety again. So the employer would need to find out if there was any other options for them to contribute under, because that part, we don't know what ASRS statutes require. We just know what public safety does require.
And Joann, do you have any thoughts on retirees who have adjunct faculty contracts with other institutions that also have a local board? This is on Trivial Pursuit this week.
Evidently it is. Could you repeat that again?
Certainly. The question reads, what about the case of retirees who have adjunct faculty contracts with an institute that also has a local board? So I guess presumably what they'd be talking about is a member of PSPRS covered plan who is retiree, taken upon an adjunct faculty position. And I guess returning to work, another employer under that same, with that contract, of course. That double return to work process.
Yes.
I'll go ahead and take that question. Again, you have to understand that local boards are reviewing employment actions, regardless of what that employment action is, whether it's a contract, whether it's full employment, et cetera. And what the local board is doing is they are ensuring that that employment action is in compliance with statute. Meaning, again, as Joann has illustrated, if you're the same employer, did you sit out 12 months is your first level of test. If the position was an open competitive process for an entry-level non-supervisory position, then it reduces to 60 days. Or again, in the instance of those arson investigators positions, there's no waiting period at all. So when it comes to the question about whether it's an adjunct contract, it really doesn't matter. The local board still has to review that action and say, was it in compliance with statute? If the answer is yes, then great. There's no issue around suspending the member's pension. Second question then is the position that the employer took the action on in a PSPRS covered position? If the answer is yes, then there's ACR implications. If the answer is no, then there's no ACR implications. So I think as employers, you need to understand that in any instance that you are employing someone, whether via a contract, whether it's true employment, if you know that that individual is a PSPRS retiree and you yourself are a PSPRS participating employer, which you're part of this conference, so I would say yes, you are, then you need to coordinate with your local board to ensure that that employment action is in compliance with statute.
Joann, and we may have covered this. If a return to work retiree retired as a police officer applies for a position with the same employer in a position that is not a PSPRS covered position, are they still required to wait the 60 days to keep their pension and start at their new job?
Same employer?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Because again, if same employer, either look at the 12 months or the 60 days in an open competitive non-supervisory position. So yes, the member has to, the retiree now has to meet that 60 days first and then can compete for that position.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and open this up for any additional questions for Ms. Lowey. We're going to give this 30 more seconds for any additional questions. All right, thank you everyone involved.
There we go. All right. So employer pension debt financing. So we have some background information on myself and my associate next to me, Clark Partridge. So this discussion, we're going to start off with understanding pensions. We're going to go pretty quickly through these first slides. This is what we use to kind of give an overview of pensions, one of the most important aspects of going through these conversations and looking for solutions for unfunded liabilities is to really get an understanding of the pension. Then we can start to focus on what those options are. And to get there, we need to go through kind of the past, how we got here with the current unfunded liabilities, what's been taking place in the present, and then what the options are as we go forward into the future. Some of the unintended consequences of the past that help to create kind of the situation we're in right now. The largest one is the PBI, the permanent benefit increase. So essentially the way the PBI functioned was 50% of the investment returns above 9%. So anything above 9%, half of that would be taken out of the trust. The unfortunate part of the way this was structured is the trust would keep all of the losses. Anything below the assumed rate of return would stay in the trust, but anything on those excess returns above 9% would be taken out. And so that half would be put into a different fund and set aside to provide cost of living increases or permanent benefit increases. When those permanent benefit increases were awarded to the retirees, that would actually increase liabilities. So we had a double impact of the PBI where half of the excess returns were taken out and then we increased liabilities at the same time. So that the math really worked against the funding of the trust over the long term. The other thing is that it had different impacts to different employers. It was not a percentage increase to the retiree's pension. It was an overall increase across the system, and the same dollar amount was given to every member, every retiree. So it had disproportionate impacts to different employers depending on how they fell into that high or low retirement income based on their salaries. And then the other thing is how this was reflected through the actuarial valuations based on actuarial assumptions. One of the basic assumptions that's made is going forward into the future for many decades, the actuaries actually assume the assumed rate of return is going to be the 7.3% we have right now. That's their assumption for every year. So based on that assumption, there was never an estimate of future years having returns above 9%. So there was never an estimate that there would be future PBIs given or no additional funds being set aside. And so the impact of that was essentially there was enough money set aside on those good years that there were actually 28 consecutive years of increases given due to the PBI. So those increases were not part of the normal cost calculation. There were also investment impacts once it was realized what those unintended consequences were. There were changes made to the asset allocation and the portfolio. By design, they reduced the volatility, which resulted in lower returns over the long term. So what changes were implemented? So kind of what happened? In the past, we had the PBI, Prop 124 and 125, the voters approved and eliminated the PBI. That created the new COLA that has a 2% cap. And so that provides much more consistency and more certainty on the actuarial valuations going forward about what those costs are. And then on the actuarial assumptions, there have been changes made. Presently, in August of 2020, the board adopted a change to the payroll growth assumption and the amortization of unfunded liabilities. So those are being implemented to help pay down the unfunded liabilities and to stay on track if we do have new unfunded liabilities that need to be taken care of in the future. The investment allocations, the asset allocation has been changed. We have new staff, new members on the investment committee with the Board of Trustees. And so we're implementing those changes in our entire approach to the investment opportunities. So again, the present, some changes that have taken place here within the agency. When I started, we had some internal control issues that came about from the audit. So last spring, we implemented a new general ledger system that was in place July 1st, so it's being used for the current fiscal year. We also did a review of the cash and contribution processing, so we have those processes documented so that we know we're assured everything's in place that we need to have the proper controls. We hired new auditors. Clifton Larson Allen is a national firm that specialize in public pensions. We hired new leadership positions. Shortly after I started in December of 2019, I hired the Deputy Administrator, Mike Smerick. Mike joined us from ADOA, where he was the Deputy State Comptroller. In addition to hiring Mike, the Deputy State Comptroller, to come to PSPRS, I also had Mr. Partridge come over to join us, and he was the State Comptroller for nearly 2 decades. So we, along with the CFO, John Mormon, we hired, he came over from Access. We had a new controller, new internal auditor, just really an incredible amount of state government experience and professionalism that have joined us here internally at PSPRS. So it really is a much different place than it was just a couple years ago. The actuaries that have come on board, they are new. They just finished their second valuation process for the system, and they created modelers for each system that will allow employers to look at different options, model different additional contributions to some different investment returns, and so they can come up with solutions and understanding really how the pensions work. We've had IT security upgrades, fantastic IT staff taking care of all the data that we have here at the system. And then the investment opportunities and asset allocation review, those changes are being implemented. We've actually taken advantage of the investment opportunities over the past year with the pandemic and the economic challenges across the country. Public pensions are uniquely situated. With our contributions coming out, the pension payroll, we actually are cash flow positive. And so with the dropping markets, we were not put in a position where we needed to liquidate investments at the low part of the market to pay the pension payroll. And we've actually been able to take advantage of those opportunities for other institutional investors that did need to liquidate for cash purposes. So we've been picking up some bargains on investments to really position us for the long term. The board adopted those actuarial changes to eliminate the negative amortization, and that's going to be phased in over the next several years. And we re-engaged our advisory committee to really build on ongoing stakeholder engagement. That includes employers as well as member groups, and they're participating in really filling that role as kind of the communications liaison between the system and the board of trustees with those other stakeholder groups. Okay, so understanding pensions, defined benefit. This is something that's important when we go through and talk to whether it's management, elected bodies, to really get an understanding about what the pensions are and how we function. The hard part is these terms that we have on here. There is an actual benefit that is going to be paid when a member retires. There is a formula in statute. It is going to be paid, and we cannot change the formula. Once it's in place for a member, we cannot change it. The hard part of pensions is we know there's going to be a liability in the future. The hard part is we have to estimate what that's going to be. So if you just think about the way we calculate that and based on the actuarial assumptions, how long is someone going to work? What's their pay going to be the last few years of their career? How long are they going to draw that pension in retirement? Do they have a spouse? Will that survivor draw for additional years? So all of these things are constantly being updated and revised and changing the estimates, trying to be as accurate as we can. But the important thing to understand is that estimate is represented as a present value calculation. And I'll go into that a little bit more because that's very important to understand. So what is an unfunded liability? So when we look at the system, we look at the assets and we take the market value of the assets today. So that's because that's the number we know. So to compare apples to apples, we need to look at the liabilities today. And so what the actuaries do is they look, well, how long is someone going to work? How long are they going to draw a pension? All of those estimates, and consider those future string of payments, and then discount those back to a present value. And they discount those using the assumed rate of return as the discount rate. So we have the asset values as of today, and we have the liabilities in a present value as of today. So the difference between those two numbers is either the amount that it's overfunded or the amount of the unfunded liability. Funded percentage, same two numbers, just as stated as a percentage. So the plan assets as of today over the present value of the liabilities. This helps identify so we can look at what are the assets available to fund the liabilities in today's dollars. The goal obviously is to be 100% funded. So we have the right amount of money today for the present value of the liabilities. But it's important to remember that if you're 100% funded, it doesn't mean you're done and everything is taken care of. Because going forward, every member that's active is going to continue to accrue additional benefits each year. And these are estimates of what's going to happen into the future. So there's going to be risk in that. There's investment risk, there's actuarial risk. Are we using the right amount for how long someone's going to work, how long they're going to draw a pension in retirement? And so there's constantly risk in revising these estimates as we go forward. That it's really important that we don't lose sight of managing these systems. The pension funding equation, this is really key to figuring out what options are out there in terms of the unfunded liability. The right side of this formula are the uses of funds, paying the benefits and providing for the expenses of running the agency. The left side of the formula is where the cash comes from each year. It's either from in return on the investments or it's through the contributions that come into the system. There is no other magical source of revenue coming in. It comes from one of those two places. And as we said, that unfunded liability, those liabilities are going to be paid in the future. It is a debt. We're estimating what that debt's going to be, but there is a formula and it will be there. Those unfunded liabilities have been earned in all of those different plans. So we've not pooled as ASRS is. Each individual employer is responsible for their unfunded liabilities that have been earned. And those are protected. Again, we can't change that formula. They're protected by the pension clause and by legal precedent that's taken place in the Arizona courts. The reforms that created Tier 3 a few years back was really good. That was something to help control the growth of the unfunded liabilities. And so creating Tier 3 was a huge benefit. But we need to remember that Tier 3 did not reduce Tier 1 and 2 unfunded liabilities. Those are legacy costs. They're going to have to be paid. And so we just need to think about those unfunded liabilities as a debt. So how are we going to manage that debt over the long term? The amount and the timing of the contributions will directly impact the funded status of each plan. The way to think about this is every additional dollar that gets contributed can earn investment returns over the long term, year after year. And the opposite is true. Every additional dollar that's not paid is a lost opportunity to earn investment returns. This is on the aggregate looking system-wide. And so you can see on an annual basis where the cash comes from coming into the plan. 45% from investment income and 55% coming from the contributions. Obviously, we want to grow the net investment income opportunity to be as much of this pie as we can. So we looked at, this is some information we put together when we presented to the City Council of Yuma. This is related to their police department plan, but all plans work the same. It's the same math. The numbers just change a little bit from employer to employer. So this is a representation of what we already talked about in terms of the unfunded liability, but this is a way to paint a picture so you can help to get an understanding of this. So the blue part of this graph are the assets. So about $54 million in assets that present, or it's a day's valuation. And then you can see that the total of the orange and the blue together are the total present value of those liabilities. So the present value estimate of the liabilities, and then you have the assets. Obviously, the orange is the unfunded portion, what we don't have the assets to cover. So, and again, it's that opportunity. So right now, the City of Yuma had 54 million in assets. So they would be earning investment returns on 54 million. If the plan were 100% funded, they would be earning investment returns on 122 million, much more of an opportunity. And so the current payment on unfunded liabilities, that unfunded portion of the contribution, makes up for that lost opportunity. That's why we have to charge that if there is an unfunded liability. And also, the way this system was set up is those payments will grow 3.5% using the payroll growth assumption each year. We haven't changed that. It's going to be working its way down and reducing that payroll growth assumption over time, but the current year is still at 3.5%. and the new actuarial assumptions will impact the unfunded portion of the contribution. So both the amortization and the payroll growth are going to increase in the short-term contribution rates, but will save money over the long term. So the thing to remember is, let me see, yeah, let me get to this one. So again, looking at, we have the assets on the left side and the liabilities on the right. And so we have the beginning assets, we have the investment returns at the assumed rate of return, and then the contributions that come in. The investment returns and the contributions, about $10.5 million coming in for the Human Police Department, which is good. That sounds good. That's a lot of money coming in to fund a pension. But you have to understand that present value calculation on the right side of the screen. So we have the beginning actuarial accrued liabilities of 122 million. And remember that present value is going to be discounted 1 year less in 2020. In essence, it's going to increase by 7.3%. And so it's going to increase to almost 131 million. So about $9 million change. So that 10.5 million on cash looks good, but when you're chasing the present value of the liabilities and it's going to increase 9 million, you're only actually gaining 1.5 million on on that huge unfunded liability of 66 million. So this graph is to give you kind of a different picture. This is the same information, 2019, that 68 million unfunded liability. And then to the right, the blue are the assets. They go from 19 to 20. There's the increase in the investments, which is the orange portion. The contributions are the gray. So you can see that the assets increase, that's good. But you can see the overall chart increase the total liabilities, that $9 million increase. So again, the cash coming in is good, but you have to understand that the liabilities are constantly increasing because of the way the present value calculation works. So Yuma Police for fiscal year 2020, here's where we were estimating the cash would come from. And you can see 37% from investments, and then the remaining 63% made up of the contributions. So hypothetically, if Yuma Police were 100% funded, the investments would be providing 83% of the cash that year. So that's that opportunity of having the additional contributions so you can take advantage of the investment returns over the long term. So again, back to the funding equation. Okay, that left side, that's where the money comes from, contributions and investment income. So even if we can do things to maximize the investment returns, we're assuming 7.3, if we could even manage to get that above 8%, that's not going to make a huge impact to a $66 million unfunded liability. So the investment returns will not solve the large unfunded liabilities. It's additional contributions to leverage those investment opportunities are really what we need to be considering. And the actuaries put together an estimate over a 17-year amortization cycle, and an additional $1 million will actually save taxpayers the estimated to be 1.8 million in contributions. So having that upfront contribution will reduce the contributions over the long term. And when you get to that end of that 17-year, you still have the original 1 million that was put in, and it will still be earning investment returns for the long term. And if we do get these large contributions in, pay down the unfunded liabilities, like we said, we can't emphasize this enough, is it's not done. It needs continued due diligence. We need to look at investment risk, actuarial risk, and manage these for the long term to make sure that it's what works for all of the stakeholders of the system. I think that's, with that, I'll turn it over to Clark.
So Mike, you teed this up very well because obviously you covered a lot of concepts, but those are so important to making sure that we have a good understanding of some of these things. So we're going to go through a few more concepts here. This is an example that we put together basically that just indicates if you had put $10 million into PSPRS back in the year 2000, and with the PSPRS returns, and you could compare them to any internal rate of return. We happen to use some that were based upon the last 4 years of the LGIP Pool 5 investments, and then index those to the 10-year treasury to kind of go backwards in time to get an approximation of what some hypothetical internal rate of return might have been. But obviously you can see some volatility in the investment side on the PSPRS side. Of course, 10-year treasuries are somewhat risk-free, as risk-free as you could probably get in a long-term investment. And so it has a lot less volatility, and you can see that on that side. So you can see the downs, the ugly part, if you will, of those losses, but you can also see that the portfolio over time recovers, and it essentially ends up over this period of time, despite the dot-com bubble and the Great Recession, COVID, et cetera, it ends up with an excess return over this particular portfolio. So you could do that type of a comparison. We'll do another snapshot here where we can take it over a 10-year period of time. You can see that the returns are a little bit different, but again, the highs and the lows, but over time, the portfolio is yielding a reasonable return. Over a 5-year return, you can see that that has on the bookends on 2016 and 2020, some not so good years. Of course, this year we've experienced a very good rebound from the COVID downturn. And so we're experiencing good returns this year. So that's just some snapshots to talk about how, yes, you can focus on returns at any point in time, but the retirement portfolios are built for long-term returns to generate those types of things. Anything you'd like to add to that, Mike?
No, thank you for that, Clark. That's perfect. Because you can see that the 0.91%, remember, our assumed rate of return is 7.3. So, but again, it's long-term. It's taking advantage of that long-term opportunity.
Yeah. So just for those of you keeping score at home and that you don't know Mike too well, Mike is really big on transparency and communication and coordination. And those are a lot of things that we're trying to do. So we're not trying to hide anything here or pull any punches, but obviously we could have picked a different 5 years to try to present. But these are the types of things that are reality that go on, and those affect your decisions that you make as participating employers and looking at your pension plans. So I think as you go through those things and you understand them, you're able to make good informed decisions.
Yeah, and Clark, I can add one more, just the transparency part of that is, and the communication is really key, because if you're going to get to looking at the opportunity for additional contributions into the system, whether it's finding cash, a new revenue stream, a debt financing, whatever that is, there's an elected body that's going to have to make that decision. And we can be part of that education. They have to understand how this works and get to a level of comfort so they can make the appropriate decision.
Yeah, and that's the feedback that we've been getting from employers that have been participating in some of these discussions. Now, Mike, we've got here a Coconino County example. You might have some familiarity with this. Could you tell us kind of what they did here? And by the way, there's a 2017 line that's going to be example in all these things where the unfunded liability goes up. I believe that's probably related to the Hall Parker case, correct? That kind of drove everybody's liabilities up across the board, right?
That is correct. That's the refunds that were made, yeah, based on the court findings. And those court findings that you mentioned, Clark, the Fields and Hall are the ones that are court precedent, that we cannot change the formula, right? They're protected by the pension clause. So here for Coconino County, this is one before I joined PSPRS a little over a year ago. I was actually at Coconino County, and this is what we put together to take care of our unfunded liability. We had a plan. We were setting cash aside in the general fund and looked at opportunities. And so we took that money, put it into PSPRS, and we did it over multiple years, kind of spreading that out. So you can see in 2016, there was a $10 million payment put in. So you can see from 15 to 16, the unfunded liability decreased about $10 million. And then continued 2017 and went up a little bit due to those court cases, 2018. And then in 2019, you can see another decrease. There was another $10 million that was taken from a capital facility fund to put in here, and actually using the savings on the contribution side out of the operating budget going back into that capital facility fund to rebuild the fund. And then if they do get to a point they need to do some work with facilities, they can do a debt financing for the facility at that point instead of doing it for the pension, and use those contribution savings to make the debt service payment. So it's just kind of another way to look at how to manage that over time, putting the additional contributions in. And I think, yeah, we look at some investment returns for what happened with these additional contributions.
Yeah, so this is an example of what Coconino County did. Let's look at what Prescott did. Now, Prescott, they passed a tax, correct?
Right. That's correct, a sales tax.
And they passed that tax. You can tell from the graph about when that tax went into effect, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of going down or treading water, it starts to go up. And you can see the year-over-year progress that they're making as a result of that action that they took. Again, a different approach, but again, having a very positive effect on their long-term pension health, correct?
Oh, absolutely. You look in the 20s and 30s as their funded percentage, getting up to 70% in just a few years by putting those additional contributions in.
What a difference that's going to make for their future. Now, here's some other examples that we've had. These are debt financing examples. So here are some that we've had. Of course, you can see we used City of Yuma. That was a recent thing. Well, not only did we give that presentation with City of Yuma, but they actually acted upon that, and they actually put a bunch of money into the system. So now they're going to be realizing some of those examples that you gave in your presentation, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, they're gonna have that savings, and the savings they have on the contributions in their general fund is going to provide the cash they need to make the debt service payment. So they did debt financing, but they didn't have to come up with a new revenue stream to pay the debt service on that.
Right. Now, Flagstaff kind of kicked off this wave of activity. What can you tell us about their thoughts as they went into this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you don't want to try to time the markets, but I think Flagstaff was very fortunate when you consider the bounce back in the markets after the downturn due to the pandemic, right? Starting with the new fiscal year, the markets have all turned around. So that over $100 million they put into the system, really they're getting a benefit on the investment side. They have the reduced contributions to pay the debt service. They actually decreased the number of years. They had re-amortized one of their plans out to 30 years. And so they're actually going to pay off their debt sooner than how they were actually structured. And they also, I think, Flagstaff pre-funded a reserve fund to help offset that investment and the actuarial risk, so that if there are some future unfunded liabilities that come about due to those changes, they have additional funding set aside to deal with that. And I know that Gila, Pinal, and Yuma have also considered a reserve fund. They didn't pre-fund it, but they're actually going to take some of their present value savings on the reduced contributions and put money aside on an annual basis to build up a reserve fund to help mitigate the risk of future investment and actuarial losses.
And that's key. I think the long-term planning and preparation is key, and the interest rates are pretty favorable too, right?
Yeah, the interest rates are absolutely incredible. I mean, we've never seen rates that low
for taxable financing.
Yeah, and
amazing.
I think it's an important thing to point out is pension obligations have been used across the country. They've been used for decades, but it just needs to be what's right for your community and get an understanding of what are the risks, what is your plan, how are you going to structure this entire plan.
And that's what we're going to get into here, some more examples. But we wanted to share with you some actual estimated savings. And you look at the ratio of the present value savings to also the amount of the financing. Pretty incredible from that perspective. So here's some things that did a little work on GFOA. There's a lot of discussion with GFOA about whether they support pension obligation bonds, yes or no. This is an article that was in June of last year. It was very brief, and it focused on two very succinct but different perspectives from the authors. There were co-authors. Terry Stone is the president of GFOA, and Gerard Miller is a former GASB member. He'd been a writer on pensions and things for state and local government, economic activity for Governing Magazine, et cetera. So pointing out a couple of different perspectives here. I think Terry Stone focused on just that there's inherent risk, that if you don't out earn the borrowing rate, that there's risk to that, right? And I think we would agree with that. But Gerard Miller had pointed out that under certain times and certain economic conditions, pension obligation bonds can be considered as part of an overall pension strategy. And I think we probably need to explore that a little bit more here today, and why some of these cities are doing this, right?
Right.
So let's go in and look at, this is a GFOA advisory that is on pension obligation bonds. And it actually states that government should not issue pension obligation bonds, and it's risk averse. But let's go through and break down the components of why they say that not to issue pension obligation bonds. Certainly there is interest rate risk, as we just talked about. You need to understand that risk, and you need to be able to take the steps to manage it appropriately and mitigate that. And those are certainly risks to take. But probably, Mike, given the current low interest rates, does that help mitigate some of that risk somewhat?
It does, because you have a much larger spread. The interest rates are extremely low right now. But again, this is something that every community needs to look at for themselves, find out what they're willing to do, what makes sense for them. And really, there's nothing magical about pension obligations, right? There's a lot of examples out there of communities that issued a lot of debt for infrastructure that got themselves in trouble.
Right.
So it's not just pension obligations. It's really looking at all the different variables and what's the right decision to make for your community.
Right. And none of us have crystal balls, right? But we need to make the best informed decisions that we can to mitigate that risk. Now, pension obligation bonds, the other thing that GFOA pointed out is they're complex. Often, many pension obligation bonds involve investment contracts, swaps, derivatives. But you don't need to involve those types of things in your particular financing. Those are separate decisions that you can make. They point out that it increases your debt burden and your bonding capacity, utilizes some of that. Certainly considerations that you need to make as you deal with any type of bonding. That's no different than any other type of financing, right? Call features, whether or not you include a call feature is probably a decision of how you want the bonds to price and how much that's going to benefit you or not, right? As part of that pricing.
Yep, all decisions that you need to make and be comfortable with.
And you may or may not include call features in those two things, but often when you're looking at things, if you don't include those call features, you're going to get lower interest rates typically. Pension obligation bonds are often structured to defer payments and principals, kick the can down the line, so to speak, right? And we know that that's not a good practice. But in our case, what we've seen is, like you talked about Flagstaff and others, they've actually shortened that period of time to pay that liability off, right?
Right, they've shortened it, and in some of them, they even keep it the same, but then use the savings out of the operating budget to actually build a reserve to offset some of those risks and mitigate those in the future. So yeah, what is your overall plan? This should not be something to kick it down the road and just take current savings. This really needs to be a long-term, sound financial decision.
And just like any financial decisions, when you make good, sound financial decisions, what that tends to do is lead to opportunities to make further sound financial decisions down the line. As opposed to if you do kick the can down the line, you tend to have to pay the piper at some point, right?
Right, absolutely.
And then probably the last point that they made was rating agencies may not view pension obligation bonds as credit positive. And notice that they said may not view. They didn't say absolutely that they do not view. And in fact, our experience in Arizona has been that they can be viewed as a credit positive or at least favorable or neutral. And a lot of that really depends, as you talked about before, is we dealt with pension reform, right? Mm-hmm. And often when people issue pension obligation bonds, they haven't dealt with pension reform. They haven't really dealt with that root cause issue like you dealt with the PBIs, right? And what PSPRS has done.
That's exactly what we heard from the rating agencies. It was the pension reforms had already been put in place. So the new tier was created. They looked at the overall economy. So we have a strong economy. And like you said, those good planning decisions from the past put us in a good place to consider this. Also with the planning on looking at the reserves, in some cases reducing the time to pay off the debt. Since those were all positive decisions and things to mitigate risk and put these communities in a stronger financial position, so far, these have all been viewed as positive by the rating agencies.
Right, because what's the biggest liability on many employers' financial statements? Their CAFRs.
Yeah, the pension debt,
liability. It may not be the largest, but it's probably right up there, right? And especially the way things have been funded lately. But these are positive steps to take long-term decision-making courses to be able to resolve the pension liabilities. So really applaud the people. The state of Wisconsin, they've got a long record of success. They're probably the top funded and one of the top rated pensions from a funding perspective in the country. And you contrast those to the state of New Jersey that has taken different approaches. Right, Mike?
Right, absolutely. And like you said, that if you're using this to kick the can down the road, that's not good planning. You're not going to have good outcomes. And that's why sometimes pension obligation bonds are looked at as something that shouldn't be done. But there are examples like the state of Wisconsin where it's been a positive outcome.
And sometimes they don't just kick the can down the road, but they also use that savings to pay for other programs, which then digs the hole deeper, right?
Right, like you said, it's that overall planning, right? Good decisions lead to other good decisions.
Yep. So Arizona experience, we'll just recap that real quick. Historically low interest rates, really good environment from that perspective right now. Credit positives, these are things that really complement the pension reform. Again, it's cohesive, it's long-term and focused in nature. Some have structured to shorten the payment time, as we've talked about. Really prioritizing the funded status and long-term savings. And a lot of what I've been impressed with some of these employers is that they're really focused on this long-term. This is not a set it and forget it type of mentality, right?
Yeah, it is. They're really focused long-term in finding that solution, which historically has not always happened. So that's been a great outcome.
Yep. And you mentioned the stabilization reserve account that some have been considering, and some are including that as part of their borrowing structure, and others are going to take the savings that they achieve and plow that back into a stabilization reserve to help them manage going forward, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And of course, strong investor demand, which is evidenced by the interest rates. So here's to recap some best practices and lessons learned. Engage your financial advisor. If you don't have one, go out and there's some good financial advisors out there that you can talk to. Coordinate with PSPRS staff, as Mike had talked about, some of the type of presentations that we've given. Be conscious of your budget capacity. One of the reasons we picked the City of Yuma to do this is that, they found that, oh, geez, we've got a budget problem this year. We can't give PSPRS all the money right now. And so you really want to plan ahead and think through that. Even put a placeholder there, because if you don't use that budget capacity, probably no harm, no foul, but at least you've got it there just in case. Again, and then consider some of the actuarial concepts as you go forward. Make sure that you're planning appropriately that way. Do an annual review of your pension. It's required by law. Make sure that, again, you consider all of these factors and that you formally accept the employer's share of the assets and liabilities based upon that valuation report. That's a requirement, and to post that funding stat policy on your website. Here's just, again, some review recommendations. All of these actuarial terms are important and they have connotations and meaning for you. We won't go through them here today, but make sure that you understand and be willing to ask questions if you have any questions in that regard. So with that, I think that our time actually, Christian, is up. What we could do is potentially wrap up with any announcements, and then we could stick around and take questions from people. Would that be acceptable?
Clark, absolutely. We'd like to make this announcement here. We just did online just a few seconds ago that the question An answer period is now open and will take as long as it requires to answer your questions related to employer pension debt financing.
Okay, probably one thing that we could talk about too, Mike, you talked about the modelers before, and I know that we've been getting questions about when the modelers are going to be available. We're trying to get those out by the end of the week. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think we should have an email going out.
That's our
shortly.
target.
That is correct. We will have a two-step process for releasing the updated modelers. We will again send a link to all of our employer finance lists, as well as to employers who have requested the modelers in the past. The point of the registration is to ensure that the Foster and Foster modeler, which is proprietary, stays within use, I guess, somewhat of guided use and for its intended purposes. When we populate our list of those who've registered it, we will follow through with a second email delivering the modeler and the guidebooks. And we hope to have that distributed by the end of the week, and the process will likely continue into next week as well.
Thanks, Christian. Now, those modelers are approximations, right? They're guides, they're tools. It's like, you know, they're not going to be an exact thing, but they're going to get you directionally correct to where you need to be, right, Mike?
Right, it's going to get you close. It's not redoing an actuarial valuation. There's not an actuary in there. So yeah, but it's a good estimate. But, and also in analyzing these debt financings, these communities have they were requesting schedules in terms of those contributions and how they break out, and in which each individual community had to request. We've actually added a new tab so that information's in the modeler now. So all the employers can have that data.
Yeah, and that's important. And again, these actuarial valuations that occur every year, they change there's so many variables, right, that go into those valuations and how difficult those are. But again, they're intended to get us directionally correct. Mike, do you want to talk just before we get to a couple of questions about, again, that concept of you've recently worked on a funding objective and some things with the advisory committee. All of this is in a goal to help us get to where we need to be, right?
Right. And again, it's long-term, but we need to make the changes and make sure that we're making progress. We want to get rid of the negative amortization and whatever we have in the unfunded liabilities. We need to be consistent and provide certainty that we're paying these things down. And there's a whole lot that goes into those modelers on the assumptions. There's a long list. There's only a few that the employers can change about contributions or investment returns, because we don't want to start creating other expectations or misunderstandings about what's in there. So there's only a few things that the employers can actually change on those modelers. But the reason is we're trying to lock down a lot of those things that really they can't change. We're not going to let them use a different mortality table, for instance.
Correct. And so there's a lot of things that you can go in and explore a little bit, but you don't want to get too far off from where the actual roadmap is leading us, right?
Yeah.
And so you can look at that and look at some of those deviations. But again, that accrued actuarial liability, that 100%, is kind of where we should be at this part of the journey, right? Is you should be making this type of progress towards your ultimate goal.
We need to get there. We need a definite plan of how to get there, not thinking we hope we get to the right direction. We're going to need, it's a closed plan. We need to get there.
Yep.
We don't check and see if we have some questions.
We do. We have question number one. What are some of the first questions that you are receiving from employers who are considering pension debt financing?
Well, a lot of the first questions is really, they're asking basic questions about, and the reason that we put the presentation together the way we did was looking at the past, the present, what are we doing now, and then what are the options? Because a lot of this is education. How do pensions work? Where did this come from? What's it mean? Is there anything we can do? So it's those initial questions around education and just wanting to understand things first.
These are big decisions for people to make. They don't make these decisions every day. And you have city councils and boards of supervisors, et cetera, that are making really generational decisions on how can we benefit our citizens. And so they're really key.
And that's why, quite honestly, that's why Clark and I are sitting right here. I took this job because I was frustrated that there wasn't information to understand this. I kind of had to figure out the pension stuff on my own at Coconino County. And so I really wanted to come in and help employers understand how this works. Started down this path, finding ways to get things on the right path. And Clark reached out and said, I'd like to be part of what you're doing too. And he's been great in doing these presentations with the employers.
You know, when you work with good people trying to accomplish good things, and you start to partner with people, you can make a difference. And that's what we're trying to do, I think.
And we have question number 2. Could you go over a little bit of the process for when PSPRS receives contributions through pension debt financing, the process as it relates to investing and how these investments are made?
You know, that really is a great question, because if you use a round number, right, 25% of our portfolio is going to be in domestic equities, the stock market. Well, the stock market is very high right now, right? You don't want to buy in at the high part of the market. So we don't, if we get $100 million from a community that does a debt financing, we don't take 25 million and put it in the stock market at the high part of the market. What we're doing is we're looking at what are the investment opportunities available to us at any given point in time. All the time we have different investments where we have money being liquidated, end of investments coming back, being reinvested. We have a target of what we need to have in domestic equities, but we're not going to take a portion of that and just stick it somewhere. We're going to make very sound, thoughtful decisions about what are the opportunities in the overall investment portfolio. So when a community is looking at doing one of these debt financings, they need to communicate with us so we know that the money is coming. We can start to consider what are the opportunities and what's the best place to put that for the entire portfolio. Because if you think about it, if you're putting $100 million in, you're actually buying into an existing portfolio with, right now we're getting close to $13 billion. So you're buying into an existing and buying a portion of that overall portfolio. So these communities don't really have to worry about the timing of when their money is coming in, because we're going to take care of that in our planning and how we do the investment opportunities.
And to remind our audience, we know we're running a little bit late, but if there's any questions that employers have related to debt financing, now is a great time. We're going to give it at least maybe 30 seconds, a minute to see if anyone's on and has a question.
Okay. So is there anything else I guess I would just offer again, if there's anyone who doesn't even really understand where to start, just start with questions with us. Just reach out. We can get some time set up to go through this and start talking about how, again, it's a decision-making process. It's an educational process. You don't have to say, yes, we're going to do it. You can just start asking questions to get an understanding.
Yeah, just echo that, and really appreciate the opportunity to share some of these thoughts and ideas with folks, and look forward to having future conversations and discussions. And if there's things that we can do to help, let us know.
Excellent. I think another great resource of information is psprs.com. We have monthly Board of Trustees meetings, investment committee meetings. All are public meetings. They are available live streaming through Zoom, which PSPRS implemented in 2020. And it has really never been easier, I guess, to keep up or get information about PSPRS. So I think with that, we're ready to wrap up day 2. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to staff.
All right, thank you.